The Earth 100,000 years ago opened itself not as a map, but as an endless horizon. To step into that time is to strip away the noise of engines and the glow of lamps, to forget the lines that slice our continents into nations, to erase cities, fences, and roads. What remains is a world of raw wilderness, immense and untamed, where every hill rose unmarked, every river carved its own truth, and every horizon was unknown. This was the long season of the Ice Age. Cold was the great sculptor, pressing down from the poles in glaciers vast as mountain ranges. They crept southward, carving valleys, grinding peaks into dust, pushing seas back into their basins. The oceans were smaller, the shorelines farther out. Land bridges, now hidden beneath waves, stretched across gaps between continents, drawing them closer. Winds moved with sharpness, carrying the breath of frost even into lands that today burn under equatorial suns. Summers came, but they were brief flickers, fragile gifts soon devoured by long winters. And yet the Earth was alive, not dead under ice, but restless, shifting, pulsing with cycles of wet and dry, heat and chill. Forests advanced and retreated, rivers swelled and then vanished. Deserts came and went like the flicker of firelight. The land was not silent background, it was the main actor. It ruled those who walked upon it, shaping their choices, their movements, even their dreams. Africa, the cradle of humanity, lay wide beneath the sun. Its savannas stretched into shimmering distances, seas of golden grass rolling beneath endless skies. Here the air was alive with movement. Herds darkened the horizon, antelope leaping in waves, wildebeest surging in thousands, zebras moving like striped shadows through the tall grass. Their migrations were the great heartbeat of the continent. Human eyes watched them, human legs followed, human hunger leaned upon their endless tides. Predators prowled close, lions waiting in the cover of grass, leopards slipping silent through shadows, cheetahs exploding into speed too sudden to resist. Rain was the law of Africa. When skies opened, rivers swelled, watering holes filled, and the land glistened with green. Hippos rolled in muddy waters, crocodiles slid beneath the surface, birds filled the air with shrieking calls. But when the skies hardened and the rains withdrew, the land cracked open, grass shriveled, herds fled, and rivers shrank to silence. People moved with them, following, chasing, surviving. To remain still was to starve. Where the Sahara spreads today in burning silence, then there were lakes vast as seas. Their waters mirrored the sky, their shores churned with bird life. Fish swam in their depths, hippos grazed in shallows, and crocodiles slid among reeds. Bands of hunters waited at the edges, stone-tipped spears ready, watching thirsty antelope lower their heads to drink. To the south, the land thickened into green. Forests rose in tangled labyrinths, humid air thick with the scent of soil and rain. Monkeys screamed from branches, parrots burst like color into the sky, and in the shadows leopards crouched unseen. Here the struggle was not hunger but knowledge. Which root healed, which poisoned, which fruit sustained. Mistake was death, memory was survival, knowledge was legacy, carried in story, handed from elder to child. Africa was generosity edged with cruelty. It fed, it watered, it sheltered, but it also killed with teeth, with thirst, with disease. Those who walked here knew abundance, but they knew no safety. The land demanded vigilance, demanded courage, demanded humility before its rhythms. To the north, beyond seas and shifting deserts, Europe crouched beneath winter's weight. Here the cold ruled. Tundras stretched vast, horizons open and merciless. Snow fell heavy, winds howled like knives across the plains, and ice clung to every surface. Herds of reindeer crossed the whiteness like living rivers, antlers raised in forests of bone, their hooves striking frost-bitten earth in unending drumming. Wolves shadowed them, patient, cunning, their yellow eyes burning in the dimness. Caves opened in limestone cliffs, their mouths black, their throats deep. Smoke stained their ceilings, memories of fire long tended. Inside, humans huddled in darkness, fragile warmth clutched against the weight of cold outside. Fires sputtered, hides wrapped thin bodies, and breath fogged in the air. Each storm was a trial. Each dawn was survival earned. Giants walked here. Mammoths lumbered across the tundra, their tusks curling in crescents of ivory, their shaggy coats glittering with frost. Woolly rhinoceroses stood as armored beasts, horns like lances, their snorts clouds of steam in frozen air. To hunt such creatures was madness, yet it was done. A single mammoth could feed a band for weeks, clothe them, arm them with bone, but to misstep was to die beneath trampling weight, or to feel horns pierce hide and flesh. Life here was pared to its edge. Wood was scarce, food uncertain, cold unrelenting. Patience was the greatest weapon. Fire was the center of existence, a fragile circle of warmth in a vast ocean of cold. Cooperation was law. Alone a person froze. Together they endured. The land demanded it. Still farther east, Asia unfolded vast as a dream without end. The steppes spread in grassland seas, winds shrieking across horizons that never seemed nearer no matter how long one walked. Horses ran free here, wild and unbroken, their herds moving in unison like waves. They thundered over plains, manes streaming, bodies shining in pale light. Behind them stalked hunters, wolves, lions, men. Forests loomed farther east, dense and endless, their shadows filled with tigers, their branches alive with bird and monkey. Rivers cut through the land, wide as seas, swollen with meltwater rushing down from peaks already crowned in snow. The Himalayas stood immovable, jagged teeth against the sky, guardians of eternity, unreachable, eternal. In the farthest south, valleys opened into lands fertile and green, cradles waiting for civilizations not yet dreamed. But for now these were only homes for wandering bands, small groups crossing wilderness without maps, moving by memory, instinct and the silent pull of hunger. Beyond, Australia still waited untouched. Its deserts lay silent, its coasts glimmered with waves, its forests held creatures unlike any elsewhere. Marsupials in forms strange and vast, kangaroos as tall as trees, wombats as large as boulders, predators whose shapes belonged to no other land. No human had yet touched its shores. The Americas too slept in human absence. Mastodons moved through forests, their tusks gleaming. Saber-toothed cats stalked plains, fangs flashing like daggers. Sloths the size of houses lumbered among trees. Rivers roared unbridged, mountains loomed unconquered, skies stretched unmarked. These continents waited in silence, unknowing that footsteps would one day arrive, carrying fire and story across their soil. The land 100,000 years ago was restless. It shifted with climate, it pulsed with season. Rains came, forests grew, rivers swelled, then all withdrew, leaving cracked earth, shriveled grass, silence. It was no backdrop, no scenery. It was will, it was power. It ruled with patience and indifference. To live upon it was to submit to its rhythms, to learn its whispers, to follow its signs. And those who walked it, small bands of Homo sapiens, did not yet dream of ruling it. They feared it, respected it, endured it. For them the land was the first great teacher, the first great spirit, the first endless challenge. The land was not a map drawn in stillness. It was a living presence, shifting, breathing, whispering its will. 100,000 years ago, to know the land was not to own it, but to walk within its moods, to sense its changes, to survive its tempers. The earth spoke through wind, through the tilt of the grass, through the flight of birds, through the silence of predators that made even the air feel heavier. Those who failed to listen did not endure. Every horizon carried uncertainty. The mountains were not mere silhouettes against the sky. They were barriers, veils, mysteries. To climb their ridges meant days of hunger, blistered feet, the risk of storms rolling without warning. Rivers were not obstacles easily bridged, but trials. To cross them was to face crocodiles in warm lands, or ice-choked currents in colder ones. Plains looked endless, but their openness meant exposure. Every shadow, every ripple of grass could be the stalk of lion or hyena. The ground itself told stories. In the dust of savannas, the tracks of gazelle marked a path toward water. In the mud beside lakes, the deep impressions of elephant feet meant a herd had passed. Claw marks gouged into tree trunks told of leopards hunting by night. Even the smallest signs, the curl of grass flattened, The sudden silence of birds were messages. People read them with the urgency of survival. To ignore them was death. Climate was not backdrop, it was law. In Africa, the sky dictated life. Clouds massed on horizons with promises of rain. The first drops struck dust and rose in fragrance like breath from the earth. Rivers bloomed alive, insects thrummed, plants unfurled, and the land fattened with plenty. But as the cycle turned, the sky hardened. Days stretched without water. The sun burned the earth into cracks. Animals thinned, and people followed them, restless shadows in search of green. In the north, cold was master. Snow fell in silence, smothering sound, wrapping the land in stillness. Rivers froze, forests stood heavy with frost, and the wind sharpened itself into a blade. Life clung to fire and to caves. The sun rose late and set early, its light pale, its warmth feeble. To wake each morning was a triumph. To feel warmth on skin was a gift. In such places, the land taught patience, taught endurance, taught that survival was not conquest but resistance. Asia told another story. Its steppes were vast as seas, horizons unbroken, grass bowing forever in waves beneath the wind. Here, distance itself was a danger. A journey across the steppe meant days without shelter, weeks without certainty of food, months spent beneath skies so open they felt endless. Storms rolled like armies, sweeping across grass with lightning and thunder. To survive here meant movement, always movement, following herds, following seasons, following memory. Beyond the places humans walked lay continents that slept untouched. Their lands were alive with creatures unknowing of people. Australia thrummed with beasts that seemed shaped from dreams. Giant kangaroos, bounding over plains, marsupial lions stalking with jaws wide, wombats vast as carts lumbering through forests. The Americas pulsed with titans, mastodons marching in herds, saber-toothed cats crouching in shadows, ground sloths moving with slow power. These lands were not empty, but waiting, their silence filled with the breath of animals, their skies unpierced by human voices. What was the land to those who lived upon it? It was mother, and it was enemy. It fed, and it starved. It sheltered, and it struck down. It demanded humility. To early humans, every hill, every river, every storm carried spirit. The land was alive, and to walk upon it was to walk within its gaze. Nights revealed its power most. Without firelight, darkness was not emptiness but presence. Stars poured across the heavens, brighter than any modern eye can imagine. The Milky Way stretched like a river of ghosts, spilling from horizon to horizon. The moon rose as guardian, a pale face in the void. Winds whispered, trees creaked, predators moved unseen. The land never slept. At dawn, the earth itself seemed to breathe. Mists coiled from rivers, dew shimmered on grass. The first cries of birds broke silence. The land was theater, and life its endless play. The people who walked here were not masters, not yet. They were participants, small figures moving upon an immense stage, watched by mountains, stalked by beasts, judged by storms. This was the land 100,000 years ago, not just soil and stone, but living force, shaping bodies, shaping minds, shaping destiny. It was unforgiving, it was magnificent, it was alive, and those who called it home carried its lessons in their bones, for to survive here was to be sculpted by it, marked forever by its will. The land was never silent, even when no voice rose, when no foot pressed upon its soil. The earth spoke in other tongues. The wind carried its language, rushing through grasslands, howling across cliffs, sighing through forests. Rivers sang with constant movement, waters striking stone, carving their way deeper through time.
The land was alive, but it was the animals that gave it voice, movement, and constant danger. 100,000 years ago, humanity did not stand alone. It lived surrounded by giants, stalked by predators, and accompanied always by the thunder of hooves and the whisper of wings. To understand life then is to step into a world where every horizon moved, where the earth itself seemed to breathe through the passage of beasts. Africa shook with migrations. Across the savannas rolled tides of life so vast they seemed endless. Herds of wildebeest swept like black rivers through seas of golden grass. Zebras,
striped in flickering light, galloped in restless waves, their hooves drumming against the earth. Antelope leapt in arcs of elegance, eyes wide, ears tuned to every whisper of danger. Elephants marched slow and deliberate, their tusks gleaming crescents, their calls deep enough to tremble through the bones of all who heard them. To walk these plains was to walk among moving walls of flesh, herds stretching beyond sight, dust rising into skies dimmed by the sheer weight of life. But this abundance was edged in hunger. Lions stalked the borders of herds, their golden bodies pressed into grass, eyes fixed, muscles coiled. They hunted with patience, waiting for weakness, for distance, for a single mistake. Leopards moved in silence, their power unleashed in a heartbeat, dragging prey into trees where no scavenger could follow. Cheetahs burst like lightning, speed unmatched, striking before prey even knew it was chased. Hyenas laughed in cruel chorus, jaws strong enough to crack bone, their numbers overwhelming any who resisted. Predators ruled by fear as much as by fang. Their presence was constant, woven into the air itself. A herd did not move without sensing them, and neither did the humans who followed those herds. The night especially belonged not to people but to beasts. Eyes gleamed in firelight, circles of reflection surrounding every camp, growls carried from the grass, howls split the silence of tundra and plain alike. To live among such creatures was to know that every step, every sound, every shadow might be the end. And yet, animals were more than danger. They were teachers. To watch a lion was to learn patience. To see wolves hunt was to understand cooperation. To study birds in flight was to find water. To read the patterns of herds was to predict migration. Humanity lived not only beside animals but through them, their survival bound together in a fragile, violent, beautiful balance. Farther north in Europe's frost, the beasts grew larger still. Mammoths strode like mountains in motion, their tusks curling outward like ivory blades. Woolly rhinoceros snorted clouds of steam, their horns sharp, their hides thick as armor. Reindeer gathered in herds so vast they darkened the land, their antlers forests of bone above them. Cave lions, larger than any lion today, prowled through snow, their strength equal to their hunger. Hyenas too stalked here, bigger than their modern kin, bone breakers that fed on both predators' kill and their own. These were the animals that tested the courage of humans. To hunt small prey fed the group for a day, but to bring down a giant fed them for weeks. The risk was immense, but so too was the reward. Bands of people stalked mammoths across plains, waiting for weakness, for exhaustion, for the perfect moment to strike with stone-tipped spears. Some never returned. Others returned victorious, carrying with them not only meat and hide, but the stories that became memory, that became legend. Asia too roared with beasts. Steppe bison, horns wide and sharp, gathered in herds, their bodies massive, their power terrifying. Wild horses thundered across plains, untamed and untouchable, their speed an echo of the wind. Tigers stalked through forests, their stripes merging with shadow, their silence more frightening than roar. Bears, immense and terrible, lumbered through valleys, kings of both forest and mountain. Wolves hunted in packs, their coordination as sharp as any human strategy. Beyond, in lands untouched by people, creatures moved in their own silence. Australia thrummed with marsupial lions, with kangaroos larger than any seen today, with wombats the size of carts, with giant birds that towered over grasslands. The Americas carried their own titans, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, sloths that stood like moving walls, armored glyptodons trundling like living fortresses. Here life was colossal, shaped by strength, horn, claw, and tusk. For early humans, animals were never simply other lives, they were survival itself. Every hunt was danger, every encounter was meaning. To see a bird's flight could lead to water, to hear wolves could mean prey nearby, or a pack ready to attack. To track herds meant sustenance, to face predators meant both fear and respect. The world of animals was a world of power. It was violent, it was dangerous, it was magnificent. To walk among them was to walk in constant awe and constant vigilance. Humanity did not yet rise above them. They looked like us. That is the first truth. If you passed one of them on the street today, washed, clothed, walking with a crowd, you might not even pause. Their faces carried the same breadth of expression. Their eyes glimmered with the same restless fire. Yet 100,000 years ago, the world they inhabited was nothing like ours. To be human then was to be fragile among titans, to live without walls, without cities, without certainty. The people of that age lived in small groups, families bound together by blood, necessity, and trust. 20, 30, perhaps 50 at most. Barns moved like shadows across the land, never staying long in one place. They followed the herds, the rains, the seasons. They were wanderers, not settlers, and every journey was a step into risk. Their shelters were as impermanent as their paths. In warm lands, branches bent into frames and covered with leaves became protection against sun and wind. In colder regions, hides stretched over poles made fragile tents or caves, offered refuge from frost and predator alike. There were no houses, no villages, no monuments, only temporary circles of survival, here today, gone tomorrow. At the center of every group burned fire. Its flames gave warmth, cooked flesh, drove away the night's eyes. Fire was fragile, a living thing that demanded care. Embers were carried across journeys, sheltered in bark or hide, never allowed to die. Around it, people gathered not just to eat, but to speak, to remember, to teach. Fire was more than heat. It was identity, it was safety, it was story. Daily life demanded labor from all. Men and women both hunted, both gathered, both cared for children. Roles shifted with need, not with rigid division. Spears of sharpened stone and hardened wood were carried into hunts, while hands searched soil for roots, reached into trees for fruit, picked berries with practiced eyes that knew poison from sustenance. Children followed, watching, learning, repeating. Every moment was education, for ignorance was death. The body of these people bore the weight of their world. They were strong, lean with endurance, built not for comfort but for survival. Their feet carried them across plains and forests without rest. Their hands shaped stone into edge, hide into cover, bone into needle. Their voices raw, growing in complexity. Past warnings, guidance, the first threads of story. Community was survival. No one lived alone. To be cast out was to be condemned. The band was the circle within which life existed. Food shared, dangers faced, children raised, the sick tended. Trust was not luxury but law. To betray it was to fracture the group, and fracture meant death. Yet within these bands, life was not only struggle. There was laughter in children chasing one another across grass. There was awe in faces lifted to skies burning with stars. There was tenderness in hands that soothed the injured, in arms that held the weak. Even then, humanity was more than hunger. Even then, it dreamed. The people of 100,000 years ago carried within them the same spark we hold now, the restless fire of thought, the endless question of what lay beyond the horizon. They were us, and we are them, divided only by time, but bound forever by the land that shaped us both. At dawn, the people rose with the animals, for the land allowed no other rhythm. The sun's first light spilled across plains or filtered through branches, and with it came hunger. There was no storage, no granary, no field to harvest. Food was not waiting, it had to be found, wrestled from the earth, taken from the chase, gathered from forest and plain. Men and women stepped out together, their feet hardened by endless travel, their eyes sharp from generations of vigilance. Spears were carried, stone edges bound with sinew to wood, points hardened by fire. The hunters searched for tracks, for broken grass, for prints pressed into soil. They bent low to read the ground, as if it were a book, deciphering the faintest signs. Each mark meant life. A herd nearby, a river crossed, a predator passed. Gatherers spread across the land, hands searching through shrubs, digging into soil, reaching into trees. They knew plants as intimately as we know streets and machines. Which berry fed, which poisoned, which root healed, which numbed. They carried these truths not in writing, but in memory, in voices repeating names and warnings to the young. Children followed them, small hands mimicking, eyes learning the difference between life and death hidden in leaf and stem. Every action was shared. When hunters returned with meat, it was not theirs alone. It was stripped, cooked, divided. When gatherers carried roots and fruit,
It was set down for all, nothing was wasted. Bone became tool, hide became shelter, sinew became cord. A kill fed more than bodies. It sustained the band's future. To hoard was to weaken the group. To share was to survive. Movement was constant. No path was permanent. No camp eternal. When herds moved, people followed. When rains failed, they walked until water was found. When predators grew bold, they abandoned the place and sought safer ground. The earth itself dictated their steps. Its pulse felt through the migrations of animals, the cycles of rivers, the whisper of seasons. They lived with danger always at the edges of their sight. A hunt could turn to death with a single misstep beneath the hooves of a frightened beast. A river crossing could draw crocodiles from the depths. A sudden silence in the forest could mean a leopard crouched in shadow. The people were strong, but they were not the strongest. They were swift, but not the swiftest. They endured not by claw or fang, but by wit, by cooperation, by memory. When night fell, the band drew close. Fire cracked in the dark, its sparks drifting upward like new stars. Shadows flickered across faces as food was roasted, shared, consumed. Voices murmured, warning of dangers, recalling paths, telling of hunts, and sometimes voices rose not in warning, but in wonder. Children listened to stories of animals as spirits, of rivers as guardians, of skies as endless journeys. These were the seeds of myth, the first roots of belief, born not from temples, but from the raw nearness of nature. The people lived hard lives. Life expectancy was short, the risks unending, the hardships constant, yet they endured, not as individuals, but as circles bound together. They endured because they knew the truth of their world. Survival was not conquest, it was unity. 100,000 years ago, the people were small in number, fragile in body, yet immense in potential. Each dawn was risk, each night a victory, and within them flickered the same light we carry now, the determination not only to live, but to remember, to imagine, to dream. Their lives were short, their dangers many, yet within those dangers grew the essence of what it meant to be human. To live 100,000 years ago was to carry the weight of vulnerability while holding the spark of imagination. They had no walls to protect them, no weapons of iron or steel, no farms to guarantee harvest, but they had memory, they had voice, they had the bond of kinship, and through these fragile tools, they carved a place within the wilderness. The people's bodies told their story. Their muscles were forged by constant motion, by endless walking, by hunts that stretched across days, by the carrying of water and children and wood. Their hands were skilled, shaping stone into blades with patient strikes, binding points to spears with sinew, weaving grass into cord, scraping hides into clothing. Their eyes scanned horizons, not for beauty, but for signs, the faint movement of a herd, the circling of vultures, the flash of predator eyes in tall grass. Though they shared the earth with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other cousins of the human line, these people, our people, were already set apart by something intangible. Their minds carried a restlessness, an urge not only to endure but to seek. Around fires, when the day's hunger was satisfied, they looked upward to the stars, tracing meaning in their scatter, feeling the weight of questions with no answers. They buried their dead sometimes with care, sometimes with offerings, small gestures that hinted at belief, at reverence, at the first tremors of spirituality. Language was young, a tool still forming, but it existed. Their voices carried warnings, sharp cries of alarm when predators prowled, soft murmurs guiding hunters in silence. They carried names, for people, for places, for animals. They carried gestures, layered with sound, weaving meaning into more than survival. Around fires, these words grew into stories, hunts retold, dangers described, myths imagined. The tongue was not yet as rich as ours, but it was fertile soil, and already seeds of culture had been planted. Community meant everything. A wound was not just one person's burden, but the group's. When one fell, others lifted. When one hunted, others feasted. When one child laughed, the whole circle was warmed by the sound. Bonds of affection were not luxuries but anchors. Without them, the thin line of survival would snap. These early humans endured not by strength of muscle alone, but by strength of belonging. And though their lives were filled with struggle, they found moments of joy. Children ran barefoot through grass, shrieking with delight. Women and men shared laughter in triumph. when a hunt succeeded against the odds. Elders told stories that made young ones' eyes widen with wonder. At dawn they watched the horizon blaze red and gold. At dusk they rested in the glow of fire, faces calm, eyes reflecting flame. Even in hardship, they found awe, they found meaning, they found something worth carrying forward. These were the people of 100,000 years ago, flesh and blood like us, fragile yet fierce, caught between the mercy and cruelty of the land. They were not yet masters of the earth, but within them burned the restless spark that would one day reshape it. The people of 100,000 years ago did not live with certainty. Each sunrise carried questions of survival. Would the hunt succeed? Would the rains return? Would predators circle the camp that night? And yet within that uncertainty, they carried a quiet resilience. They endured because they had learned the most important lesson of all, that together they were stronger than alone. At the edges of firelight, they whispered to one another, voices low so as not to stir the darkness. They spoke of rivers where fish could be caught, of valleys where herds once gathered, of mountains where storms waited. Knowledge was shared not through books or maps but through memory, carried in words, in gestures, in story. Elders became libraries of experience, children the inheritors of every mistake and triumph. To forget was death, to remember was survival. The faces of these people were marked by struggle, but also by care. A mother soothed a child's cry with soft humming, a rhythm carried perhaps from her own mother before her. A hunter helped another rise after a fall, binding a wound with strips of hide. An elder guided young hands in shaping stone, teaching patience with every strike. These acts, small constant, were the fabric of humanity, woven long before cities or nations. Death was never far. Illness struck without warning, injuries festered, predators claimed the careless. Yet even death shaped meaning. Sometimes the dead were buried, covered with soil, with stones, with flowers or red ochre. These gestures spoke of more than disposal. They spoke of reverence, of grief, of a sense that life extended beyond breath. Even in an age so raw, people felt the weight of the unseen. Though their lives were harsh, they carried within them the restless spirit that would not be contained. Their eyes sought horizons, their minds shaped questions, their voices carried stories. In every firelit circle, the seeds of culture were being sown, seeds that would grow into myth, into belief, into art, into civilization itself. They were fragile bodies on a dangerous earth, but they were also something greater. They were dreamers, they were survivors, they were us.
The sun dies each evening, and with its death the world of 100,000 years ago was transformed. Darkness did not come slowly then. It fell heavy, absolute, a blanket of blackness unbroken by village lights, by lanterns, by cities. Night was total, stretching from horizon to horizon, pierced only by stars and by the frail glow of fire. For people, fire was more than survival. It was the line drawn between terror and safety, between silence and story. When the flames crackled, the night was pushed back, predators kept their distance, and shadows danced across human faces. Without it, darkness pressed close, alive with eyes, with teeth, with whispers of unseen danger. Fire was light, heat, and shield, but it was also something deeper, mystery, spirit, the first true companion. To make fire was no simple matter. A spark struck from stone, a coal carried carefully from an earlier blaze, embers preserved in bark and guarded across journeys. Fire was never taken for granted. A storm could drench it into silence, a careless hand could scatter it into nothing. Entire bands depended on its survival, and the tending of fire was a sacred duty. Someone always watched the flames, feeding them, guarding them, ensuring that the circle of warmth never broke. Around fire, humanity gathered. Here the day's danger fell away, if only for a time. Spears rested at hand's reach, children pressed close to mothers, elders sat with their faces glowing red and gold, flames lit eyes that told stories. Sparks rose like brief stars, disappearing into the black sky, and above them the Milky Way spilled bright across the heavens. For those who lived then, stars were not mere decoration but presences, mysteries that spoke of forces greater than themselves. Fire below mirrored fire above, the small, fragile blaze echoing the vast burning of the cosmos. The night outside the circle was alive. Lions prowled, their roars rumbling from beyond the grass. Hyenas laughed with shrill cruelty, their calls carrying far across plains. Wolves howled in chorus across tundra, their voices trembling the air. In forests, leopards coughed in the dark, owls called, insects hummed. Night was not silence but orchestra, and only fire broke its dominance. Yet fire was not only shield, it was also transformation. Raw flesh turned tender above flame, bones softened to release marrow, plants hardened by heat into sustenance. Fire lengthened the range of food, broadened the horizon of survival. It warmed bodies against frost, dried hides into shelter, hardened spear tips into sharper weapons. It was technology, spirit and mystery all at once. And it gave birth to something greater still, story. Around flames, humans did not only eat and rest, they spoke. They shared warnings of rivers and predators, retold hunts with gestures and sound, passed knowledge from elder to child. In these circles, memory was preserved, multiplied, made stronger. Fire was the stage, and voices the actors. But even beyond memory, fire inspired imagination. In its flicker, shadows became spirits. Sparks became stars rising into the heavens. Flames themselves seemed alive, whispering, reaching, dancing. People stared into them not only for warmth but for wonder. From fire came myth, from myth came culture, and from culture came the first roots of what it meant to be human. So the night was no longer only fear, it became meaning. Around fire, darkness turned from enemy into mystery, from threat into canvas upon which imagination was painted. For the first time, humanity began to live not only in the world but also in story, and fire was its heart. The night stretched vast and endless, but where fire burned, humanity carved out a fragile island of light. That glow was more than survival, it was belonging. People leaned toward the flames, their faces half lit, half shadowed, their eyes reflecting the dance of orange and gold. Fire was the circle that held them together, the border drawn against the unknown, the rhythm of crackle and his weaving itself into the pulse of their lives. Children sat wide-eyed at its edge, the heat touching their cheeks, the sparks rising above them like fragments of stars. They reached out their hands, curious, feeling the warmth, pulling back with nervous laughter when the flames flared. Elders sat steady, their voices weaving tales that belonged to memory as much as to imagination. Hunters rested, their spears laid aside, their shoulders unburdened for the first time since dawn. Mothers and fathers hushed infants with low murmurs, soft and rhythmic like the whisper of the fire itself. Here, in the glow of flames, humanity began to speak beyond necessity. In the day, words were tools, warnings of predators, instructions for the hunt, names for plants and rivers. But at night, around the fire, words stretched into something more. Stories grew, of the great beasts they hunted, of the rivers that rose and fell, of the storms that rolled without mercy. Myths flickered into being, the lion as spirit of the plains, the mammoth as guardian of the cold, the stars above as ancestors watching from the void. Fire gave them not only warmth but time to imagine, to wonder, to share. The night outside pressed heavy, alive with sound. A lion's roar rolled across grasslands, low and deep, making hearts tremble even in the safety of flame. Hyenas screamed in cruel laughter, circling, their eyes glinting in darkness. Wolves howled across tundra, their calls carried on winds sharp as knives. In forests, leopards coughed, owls shrieked, insects thrummed. The world beyond was alive, full of hunger, but fire drew the line. Predators circled, but they did not cross. The flames stood as warning, a symbol as much as a shield. The people too began to see fire as more than survival. Its glow became spirit, its warmth became gift, its danger became power. To tend it was duty, to let it die was shame. Fire was life, but it was also mystery. Why did it dance? Why did it consume? Why did it breathe and die like a living thing? In its light, humans began to feel awe not only of the land but of forces unseen, forces greater than themselves. When storms struck, rain fought flame, people shielded it with hides, carried embers wrapped in bark, guarded sparks as though guarding children. When lightning tore across skies and fire erupted in forests, they watched with fear and reverence, seeing in its destruction both danger and gift. Fire could devour as easily as it could protect. It was not tamed fully, it was borrowed, courted, carried. It was an ally, never entirely a servant. So the night was transformed. Where once darkness alone ruled, now there was fire, fragile, flickering but profound. Around it, humanity learned not only to endure but to imagine. They learned to bind memory to flame, to share meaning in its glow, to turn silence into song, danger into myth. Fire gave them a place in the night, a circle of belonging in a world that until then had belonged only to beasts and stars. And within that circle, something new was born, the slow, trembling beginnings of culture, carried forward in story, in song, in the endless rhythm of flame against the vast black of night. Darkness was a kingdom, and fire the fragile rebellion within it. To sit by the flames 100,000 years ago was to hold a piece of the sun against the void, to claim a sliver of safety where none should exist. The people knew this, felt it in their bones each time the sparks rose skyward and was swallowed by the stars. Without fire, the night was endless. With fire it was divided. One world inside the circle of light, another outside it, vast and unknowable. Inside the circle, time stretched differently. The day was measured in hunger and danger, but the night under firelight gave space for reflection. Words spilled more freely. Hands moved in shadows, gesturing with stories. Hunters mimed the strike of spears, the fall of prey. Elders described rivers that bent through valleys, storms that came without warning, places where animals gathered in plenty. Children watched and listened, their imaginations fed not only by food, but by memory passed into story. It was here, in these fragile hours, that humanity learned to carry its world in more than muscle. Knowledge was lifted into voice, pressed into rhythm, preserved in imagination. Fire became the stage, memory the script, survival the audience. Even when the flames burned low, even when the wind hissed through the grass, the people stayed close, drawing strength from one another and from the glow that pushed darkness back. Yet fire did not only allow memory, it also awakened vision. Shadows on stone became figures of beasts and spirits. Sparks leaping skyward seemed souls ascending to stars. The very movement of flame gave life to things unseen, stirred questions not tied to survival, but to mystery. Why did flame breathe? Why did it dance and die? Was it alive? Was it spirit? In its presence, humans began to feel awe not just for what was, but for what might be. The predators circling outside seemed part of this mystery. Their eyes glimmered just beyond the light, green and gold reflections on the edge of vision. Their voices rose, echoing across the night, growls, howls, screams that pierced silence. And yet, they did not cross. They prowled, they tested, but they hesitated. Fire was not merely physical defense, it was symbol, power, barrier. It divided the world in two. Inside, humanity; outside, the wild. The night sky watched it all. Stars glimmered sharp, untouched by the haze of modern lights, burning with clarity unimaginable to us. The Milky Way arched across heaven like a river of fire mirroring the one below. The moon hung cold and eternal, rising and setting in rhythms older than memory. The people sat beneath it, their faces lit from below by fire, from above by starlight, caught between two flames, the fragile one they tended, and the eternal one of the cosmos. In that space, fire became more than tool. It became bridge, between day and night, between life and death, between the known and the unknowable. It allowed bodies to endure, but it also allowed minds to wander. And so, around fire, humanity became something more than animal. They became storytellers, believers, dreamers. The night was vast, the beasts outside were many, but with fire, the people did not merely survive, they began to belong. When the flames burned low and embers glowed red in the ash, the people felt the fragility of their light most clearly. They leaned close, feeding the coals with splinters of wood, breath whispering against sparks, coaxing fire back to life. To let it die was unthinkable, for without it the night would swallow them whole. Fire was the heart of the camp, and to lose it was to lose safety, warmth, memory, story. Every ember was a promise, every flame a triumph. Beyond the circle of glow, the night lived its own fierce life. Lions moved in silence, their roars rolling only when they wished to announce their rule. Hyenas prowled with laughter like knives,
waiting for weakness, sniffing for scraps. Wolves traveled in restless lines, their voices carried across tundra in howls that trembled the air. Insects droned in forests, owls shrieked, bats flickered across the sky. The darkness was crowded, and yet it remained unseen, pressing always against the border of flame. Inside, people watched and listened, their hearts beating to the rhythm of the fire. They understood the division. The outside was danger, the inside was survival. But as the hours deepened, as fatigue weighed on eyes, fire also became doorway. Elders gazed into it as though into vision. Children stared and saw not only flame but spirits, stories, ancestors moving in the flicker of light. Fire carried imagination outward, upward, into places beyond reach. Around it, ritual began to take root. Certain logs chosen, certain gestures repeated, certain words spoken before embers were left to smolder. The act of tending flame grew sacred, for it was not only warmth but continuity, the thread that carried life across days and nights. To hand an ember from one guardian to another was to pass responsibility, to pass trust. To wake and see flame alive was reassurance. To wake and see only darkness was despair. In this way, fire shaped more than survival. It shaped identity. It gave the people not just food and shelter, but a sense of belonging together. The circle of light was community. The voices around it were memory. The shadows it cast were the first myths, the first glimpses of gods, of spirits, of the unseen. The night no longer belonged solely to beasts and stars. It belonged too to humanity. When dawn finally rose, the people carried their fire with them. Embers cradled in bark or carried in stone bolt, protected as though they were children. The flames that had pushed back night were not abandoned, but taken forward, step by step, journey by journey. Fire was life, and life demanded that it be carried always, a fragile inheritance guarded through storms and hunger, through danger and time. So the people walked into each new day, the memory of night still fresh in their bones. They had endured darkness, endured the nearness of predators, endured the vast silence of the world beyond. And they had done so because of fire, the fragile flickering miracle that gave them light, warmth and story. Fire was their first great ally, their first great mystery, their first great spirit. The night remained vast, the beasts remained many, the dangers remained endless. But within the glow of flame, humanity had begun to carve a place in the world, not as prey alone, not as wanderers only, but as dreamers. With fire, the people of 100,000 years ago carried within them the beginnings of everything that would follow: myth, memory, meaning. And in the dance of shadows across their faces, in the sparks rising to join the stars, the future already flickered.
The hunt was the great trial of human life 100,000 years ago. To rise at dawn and walk into the wilderness with nothing but sharpened stone, fire-hardened wood, and the fragile bond of kinship was to step into a contest older than memory. Hunting was not pastime, not choice, not sport. It was survival itself, the thin line that kept a band alive for another day. The land breathed with animals then, but to take one was no small thing. A single gazelle could feed a group for a night. A wildebeest could feed them for several. A mammoth, if brought down, could transform life for weeks. But none of these came easily. The people were small in number, light in body, fragile against the claws, tusks and hooves of their prey. To hunt was always to gamble, between hunger and death, between triumph and tragedy. At dawn, hunters set out. They carried spears of wood tipped with stone, blades chipped sharp by hands practiced in patient strikes. Some carried throwing sticks, others carried knives of flint, thin and fragile but capable of tearing hide and flesh. Their eyes scanned the earth as much as the horizon, reading signs left in soil, the deep indentation of a mammoth's step, the narrow line of gazelle prints, the dragging trail of a wounded beast. These tracks were words in a language older than writing, and to read them was the skill upon which all survival depended. The hunters moved silent, their bodies bent low, their feet placing weight carefully so as not to snap twig or crunch stone. They studied the wind, pressing dust into the air to see which way it carried. They smelled it, tasted it, learning whether their prey lay ahead. Each breath was measured, each glance deliberate, for the difference between success and failure lay in details so small they would go unnoticed by untrained eyes. The great beasts were not only food but danger. To bring down an aurochs, a wild bull larger and fiercer than any modern cattle, was to step into war. Its horns could gore, its hooves could crush, its charge could scatter hunters like dry leaves. Mammoths, immense and patient, were walls of flesh, their tusks capable of lifting a man and hurling him into the earth. Even the smaller animals, deer, boar, antelope, were deadly when cornered, their kicks and strikes breaking bone with ease. And beyond the prey itself lay predators. A hunt's noise could draw lions, could lure hyenas, could awaken leopards watching from the grass. The blood of a kill did not belong to humans alone. It called out to the land, and the land came to claim it. Every hunt was double danger from the prey, and from those who sought to steal it. To survive, hunters did not rely on strength. They relied on numbers, on patience, on endurance. They stalked prey for hours, sometimes days, wearing it down, following its path across plains and rivers, until exhaustion slowed its steps. They set ambushes in valleys, drove herds into traps, forced beasts toward cliffs or swamps. Cooperation was their true weapon. Alone, a hunter was nothing. Together they were possibility. The moment of strike was chaos. Spears flew, cries rose, prey bellowed, hooves thundered, tusks swung, dust filled the air, screams of beast and hunter mingled. Blood ran dark against soil. Some fell, trampled, broken, torn. Others triumphed, pressing close, stabbing, striking until the animal collapsed in weight and silence. Then came relief, laughter, tears, shouts of victory. For a moment, hunger was silenced, death kept at bay. The kill was never waste. Flesh was cut, marrow cracked, hide stripped, bones saved, fire roasted meat, smoke carried scent into the sky, and predators prowled close, eyes glowing, teeth flashing. But within the circle of flames, people ate, their bellies full, their bodies warm. For a time, life felt rich. For a time, survival was secure. And when the story was retold by firelight, it became more than food. It became memory, lesson, myth. Children listened wide-eyed as hunters gestured, mimicked the beast's charge, laughed at close escapes, honored the fallen. The hunt became not just sustenance but identity. To hunt was to be human. To bring down the giant was to defy the land itself. The hunt did not end with the kill. That moment, when the beast fell, when dust hung in the air, when hearts thundered as loudly as hoofs, was only the beginning of another struggle. To bring down a creature larger than a man was triumph, but triumph was fragile. The scent of blood carried far, drifting on winds that summoned predators from miles away. Lions smelled it, hyenas heard it, vultures spiraled above it. Even as hunters shouted their victory, they knew the land was listening, and that it would answer. The carcass had to be claimed quickly. Spears were left in the ground, forming a defensive wall, while knives of flint tore into flesh. Hands worked fast, stripping meat from bone, carrying chunks back to camp. Others stood guard, watching the edges of grass, ears tuned to rustle, to growl, to sudden silence. Every moment was measured against the approach of danger. Sometimes predators came before the work was finished. Lions prowled low, their bodies glinting in half-light, their roars deep enough to freeze breath. Hyenas circled in laughing packs, their jaws snapping, their hunger unashamed. Wolves moved as shadows across tundra, their eyes catching firelight from distant camps. In those moments, the hunters faced a choice: fight for the kill, or flee with what they could carry. Spears thrust, stones hurled, firebrands waved. The night became a contest of courage and desperation, and sometimes the predators won. But when the meat was carried safely home, when fire cracked in the center of camp, and smoke rose into the dark, then came celebration. Bellies filled, laughter echoed, children tasted the feast with wide eyes and sticky fingers. Hunters leaned back, their bodies heavy with exhaustion and pride. Women roasted fat until it hissed. Marrow was cracked from bones, hides stretched to dry, sinew stripped for binding. Every piece of the beast was used, nothing wasted. To waste was to insult the land, to tempt its cruelty. The hunt bound the group together. Those who had stayed behind listened with rapt attention as the story was told and retold,
gestures painting the moment when spears struck, when the beast roared, when one hunter stumbled and was pulled back to safety by another. The story grew with each telling, small details swelling into legend. Children replayed it in play, wielding sticks as spears, mimicking roars, pretending to fall and be saved. In this way the hunt lived on, not just in memory, but in identity. There was pride in the hunt, but there was also grief. For not all who left returned. The ground remembered them, soaked with blood that never reached the fire. Bands carried their absence with heavy silence, their names spoken in whispers, their bravery folded into story. Death was never far, and the hunt often carried it home. Yet still they hunted. Hunger allowed no rest. To eat was to endure another day. To endure another day was to continue the story of humanity itself. Each step into the grass, each approach toward a herd, each thrown spear was both defiance and necessity. The land demanded courage, and the people answered, again and again with fragile bodies and unbreakable will. The giants of that time, mammoth, aurochs, bison, rhinoceros, were not merely animals, they were adversaries, teachers, trials set by the earth. To face them was to prove belonging. To kill them was to carve a place in a world that seemed too vast, too dangerous, too alive to allow such fragile beings as humans to survive. And so the hunters walked into each new dawn, their spears in hand, their eyes sharp, their hearts carrying both fear and hope. They knew the risks, they knew the cost, but they also knew the truth. Without the hunt, there was nothing. The hunt was hunger, the hunt was danger, the hunt was humanity itself. The hunt began long before the spear was raised. It began in whispers of the wind, in the faint indentations pressed into soil, in the way a flock of birds scattered suddenly into the air. The hunters of 100,000 years ago lived not by force alone but by observation. Their eyes studied the earth as if it were a vast page, their minds translating every broken blade of grass, every overturned stone, every distant sound. To track was to read the living script of the land, to follow words written in hoof and paw. For hours, sometimes for days, they moved in silence. The sun blazed above savannas, or the cold bit into skin across frozen tundra, but the hunters pressed on. Each step had to be measured, for they carried no armor, no protection but their numbers, their patience, and their sharpened points of stone. Their bodies endured miles of pursuit, muscles taut, breaths measured, sweat running into eyes, yet they did not falter, for hunger sharpened them more than any blade. The prey was immense. To bring down a reindeer herd required timing, waiting for the moment when the animal's endless motion faltered, when panic scattered them, when the weakest fell behind. To challenge a bison was to stand before a wall of living fury, horns lowered, hooves striking earth in thunder. To stalk a mammoth was to stalk a moving mountain, one that could crush the life from a hunter with a single swing of its tusks. And yet these were the prizes that promised survival beyond a single meal. The hunters used the land as ally. They drove beasts toward marshes where hooves sank deep, toward cliffs where there was no path but downward, toward narrow valleys where spears could strike from both sides. They moved together, shouting, gesturing, flanking, their voices rising not in fear but in force, becoming a wall of sound that pushed prey into panic. Some threw spears from afar, stone tips slicing through air. Others closed in, stabbing, risking the deadly nearness of tusk and horn. The struggle was chaos. The roar of beasts clashed with the cries of men. Dust rose in clouds, blinding eyes, filling lungs. Hooves pounded, earth shook, spears snapped, hunters stumbled. Some fell and did not rise again. Others fought through the storm, striking, bleeding, enduring until the beast collapsed with a groan that seemed to shake the land itself. When the giant fell, silence followed, an unnatural stillness, heavy, broken only by the ragged breaths of hunters and the distant calls of circling scavengers. Then came shouts, laughter, tears. The band surged forward, hands working, blades cutting, bodies trembling with triumph and exhaustion. They had faced death, and they had prevailed, but the hunt was not finished. The carcass was wealth, and wealth attracted rivals. Already the air carried the scent of blood, the promise of feast. Lions prowled nearer, their golden bodies glinting in fading light. Hyenas circled, their laughter cruel, waiting for weakness. Vultures spiraled high above, dark messengers calling all who fed on death. Hunters knew they had little time. Meat was carved in haste, fat stripped, marrow cracked, hides cut loose. Children and the wounded were sent back with what they could carry, while the strongest kept watch, spears ready, firebrands lifted. Sometimes they defended their kill with violence, standing shoulder to shoulder against beasts that tested the edge of light. Spears thrust at lion eyes, stones flew at hyena skulls, torches hissed as fire drove back the dark. But not always. Many kills were lost, surrendered to predators too numerous, too fierce. In those moments, survival meant retreat, carrying only fragments of victory. Hunger lingered, but life endured. Back at camp, when meat smoked above flame, when bellies filled, and the weight of exhaustion gave way to laughter, the hunt became more than necessity, it became story. Hunters retold the moments of fear and triumph, arms sweeping wide, voices imitating the bellow of beasts, the clash of horns, the cry of victory. Children stared wide-eyed, mimicking movements, absorbing the lesson: courage, cooperation, vigilance. Around fire the hunt transformed into memory, and memory into myth. The land did not make hunting easy. It tested patience, tested endurance, demanded sacrifice. Many hunts ended in failure, in wounds that festered, in deaths carried back in silence. Yet still they hunted, again and again, because without it, there was no survival. Gathering gave sustenance, but the hunt gave strength, fat, warmth, tools, stories. It was risk, but it was life. The giants of that age, mammoths, aurochs, bison, rhinoceroses, were not only prey but teachers. They forced humans to adapt, to think, to remember. Each hunt sharpened the bond of the band, forged unity in blood and fire. Alone, a man could not face them. Together, they endured. Together they triumphed. Together they carved their fragile existence into a world that seemed determined to erase them. Hunting the giants was not only survival, it was humanity's first act of defiance against the vastness of the earth. It was proof that even the smallest of creatures, fragile and weaponless, could stand against titans and live. The hunt was more than a contest of hunger and survival. It was ritual, memory, and the thread by which humanity stitched itself to the land. Every kill left a scar on the earth, and on the minds of those who witnessed it, echoing long after the blood had dried. In this way, hunting the giants was not only a daily struggle, but a shaping force, molding what it meant to be human. The hunters rose before dawn, long before the horizon glowed red. Stars still poured across the heavens in their silent blaze. The air was cold, breath misting from mouths, as they tightened the sinew bindings of their spears. Each man and woman carried the weight of generations behind them, the memory of every hunt that had come before, the mistakes, the triumphs, the stories retold by fire. Their footsteps were soft, pressing into grass and dust, but their hearts pounded with both fear and resolve. The giants were near, signs lay fresh, the vast round imprint of a mammoth's foot, pressed deep into earth, the torn bark of trees stripped by elephantine hunger, the steaming dung of aurochs heavy with the smell of grass. The hunters studied these signs with reverence, as if reading sacred text. This was their scripture, written not in ink, but in soil and scent. The band spread wide as they approached, circling prey with patience. Their bodies moved low, their breaths shallow, their eyes searching for the weak, the old, the young separated from herd. Spears glinted faintly in the rising light, but the hunters did not rush. They waited. Patience was their weapon. The giants were stronger, faster, deadlier, but humans had endurance, and they had time. They pursued not in bursts but in hours, sometimes days, wearing down their quarry until its steps faltered, until its strength bled away with sweat. The moment of strike was storm. Cries erupted, spears flew, the herd broke apart in terror. A mammoth bellowed, its tusks swinging in wide arcs, throwing dust and men into the air. An aurochs charged, horns lowered, scattering hunters who leapt aside in desperation. Blood sprayed across grass, steaming in morning air. The hunters shouted, voices rising in unison, a chorus of defiance against the impossible. Spears struck again and again, some shattering, some glancing off thick hide, some piercing deep. The beast stumbled, rose again, stumbled once more, until at last it crashed to earth with a sound like thunder. Silence followed, heavy, broken only by ragged breathing. Dust hung in the air, shimmering in sunlight. The hunters stood in awe, not only of their victory, but of the immensity of what lay before them, a creature greater than themselves, felled by their unity, their will, their fire. Laughter broke, then shouts of triumph, then tears, for they had done what seemed impossible. They had stolen life from the land itself. But the danger was not finished. Already, the smell of blood reached the unseen. Vultures wheeled above, dark spirals against the sky. Hyenas slinked closer, eyes flashing in grass. Lions prowled at distance, their golden bodies half hidden, patient, waiting. The hunters worked with feverish speed, knives slicing, hands pulling flesh, hides sinew. Children were sent running with first loads, their small bodies burdened with gifts of survival. The strongest remained, spears at ready, forming walls of defiance. Firebrands waved, voices shouted, stones flew. The predators tested, pressed, circled, but the flames and the courage of the band held them back. For a time, when the hunters returned to camp, the feast began. Meat sizzled above flame, fat dripping into fire, filling the air with smoke and scent. Children laughed with mouths full, their faces shining with grease. Elders ate slowly, their eyes distant, remembering hunts long past. Stories began, even before the feast was done. Hands gestured wildly, voices rose and fell, mimicking the crash of mammoth, the charge of bull, the fall of prey. The hunt was relived, magnified, woven into memory, and in those stories, the dead were remembered, for not all hunts ended in triumph. Names were spoken of those who had fallen, crushed beneath hoofs, gored by horns, left behind in blood and silence. Their courage was folded into legend, their loss carried forward as lesson. Death and survival walked hand in hand, and the people knew that one could never exist without the other. The giants shaped the hunters, as much as the hunters shaped the giants. To face them was to learn patience, to learn unity, to learn humility, before the vastness of life. Each hunt carved humanity deeper into itself, forging bonds, shaping minds, planting seeds of story and spirit. In the shadow of these beasts, fragile men and women became more than survivors. They became dreamers, builders of memory, creators of meaning. The hunt was not only blood and danger, it was ritual, it was myth, it was humanity's first great art, the art of defiance, of cooperation, of survival. And though the giants have vanished, their echoes remain, carried in our bones, in our stories, in the restless fire that still drives us forward.
Before the spear, before the clash of men and beasts, there was the hand reaching into grass, into branches, into soil. Hunting carried danger and triumph, but gathering carried continuity. It was the steady pulse of survival, the daily rhythm that fed the band when the hunt failed, or when the giants moved beyond reach. 100,000 years ago, humanity lived as much by what it found beneath trees and in riverbanks as by what it brought down with spears. The gatherers rose with the first light of dawn, while hunters set out with weapons in hand. Others, women, men, children old enough to walk, spread into the land with baskets woven from reeds, with hides to carry roots, with memory as their greatest tool. Their eyes scanned not horizons but details, the color of leaves, the shape of fruit, the scent of flowers, the texture of bark. Where the hunter read tracks of animals, the gatherer read the tracks of plants. Knowledge was everything. The land offered abundance, but also poison. One berry fed, another killed. One root healed fever, another rotted the belly from within. Mushrooms sprouted overnight, some rich with sustenance, some filled with death. Seeds, pods, nuts, all demanded recognition. There was no second chance in mistakes. The memory of plants was carried not in writing, but in story, in gesture, in practice. Elders guided children's hands, naming each leaf, each stem, repeating warnings until they became instinct. The savanna was not empty. It bloomed with hidden treasures, tubers buried deep in dry earth, waiting for careful hands to dig them out. Wild grains bending heavy in wind, their seeds shaken loose into woven bags. Fruits bursting with juice, clung to by birds and monkeys. In forests, vines draped heavy with berries, roots tangled beneath damp soil, nuts dropped from canopies above. Along rivers, reeds grew fat, fish trapped in shallow pools could be caught by hand, and shellfish clung to stones waiting to be pried free. Gathering was slow work, but it was constant. Hours bent beneath sun, hands stained with soil and juice, feet carrying weight back to camp. Children learned as they worked, tasting, touching, listening. They played too, chasing each other through tall grass, but even in play they absorbed knowledge, names, warnings. This was inheritance, not of wealth, but of survival. Yet gathering carried danger too. The land did not give freely. Leopards crouched in branches, watching silently. Snakes slid through undergrowth, their bite sudden and final. Insects swarmed, carrying fevers. Even the plants themselves could betray. The gatherers walked carefully, every sound, every silence a signal. A sudden hush in bird call meant predator. A rustle in grass meant unseen movement. The act of bending to pluck fruit was as dangerous as raising a spear to strike prey. Still, gathering was the heartbeat of daily life. It gave rhythm when hunting gave uncertainty, when prey eluded hunters, when giants roamed too far, when spears returned empty. It was the basket of roots and berries, the bundle of leaves and grains, that kept hunger at bay. Fire roasted not only flesh but seeds, nuts, plants, fish caught by hand. Around its flames, all were equal, all contributed, all shared. To gather was to walk the land with intimacy, to know every curve, every cycle, every season. It was not less than the hunt, but its complement. One could not exist without the other, and within this act of searching, of remembering, of sharing, humanity learned something greater still, that survival was not only in courage, but in knowledge, passed hand to hand, voice to ear, generation to generation. The land spoke, and the gatherers listened. They carried its secrets, not in stone or fire but in memory, in careful hands, in patience, and through them the people endured, fed not only by the giants they sometimes conquered, but by the quiet gifts hidden in roots and branches, waiting to be found. The forest floor was a library, and each leaf a page. The savanna was a map, and each plant a marker on its shifting surface. 100,000 years ago, to walk into the wild empty-handed was not to walk into mystery, but into knowledge already carried in bone and memory. The gatherers were keepers of this knowledge. They were the memory of the land given voice, and without them the band could not endure. They rose with the sun, moving silently, their eyes alive with detail. To the untrained, the earth looked the same in every direction, grass bending in wind, shrubs crowding riverbanks, trees standing in clusters of green. But to the gatherers, each plant bore its identity. This leaf sharp with healing, that one bitter with poison, this berry swelling sweet with sustenance, that one hiding death behind its color. They walked not through wilderness, but through a living catalogue. The seasons shaped their path. In the rainy months, fruits swelled, heavy with juice, birds calling in the canopy, as if celebrating the abundance. Roots grew thick in moist soil, tubers long and full beneath the earth, waiting to be dug by practiced hands. In the dry season, the land stripped itself bare, grasses brittle, rivers shrinking to trickles. Then the gatherers turned to hidden stores, seeds shaken from wild grasses, nuts stored in caves, roots that clung stubbornly to life even in dust. Knowledge was not a choice but law. To forget was to starve. Children were trained in this art from their first steps. Mothers placed berries in their hands, guiding them to taste, to spit out, to recognize scent and shape. Elders repeated warnings endlessly. This leaf burns the tongue, this nut feeds, this mushroom kills. Small mistakes were tolerated with bitter taste or stomach pain, but lethal ones were remembered through story, through ritual, through graves dug shallow in earth. The dead were teachers too, their absence a reminder carved into memory. The tools of gathering were simple but profound, digging sticks carved from wood pried roots from soil, woven baskets of reeds or grass carried nuts and fruits, skins stretched into slings bore seeds and grains. Fire transformed what was found, turning bitter roots edible, softening seeds, roasting nuts until they cracked. Technology did not only live in the spear, but in the patient hands of those who foraged. Yet the act itself was never without danger. The forest concealed more than fruit. Leopards crouched in branches, their spotted coats blending into light and shadow. Snakes coiled beneath roots, silent until they struck with venom quick as lightning. Insects swarmed, biting, stinging, carrying fevers that burned the body for days. Even plants themselves were treacherous. Thorns tore skin, sap blistered flesh,
Roots mimicked one another with deadly deception. The gatherers' work demanded courage equal to the hunters, though its dangers were quieter, less celebrated. The rhythm of gathering was slower than the chaos of the hunt, but no less vital. Hands worked steadily, breaking open pods, digging soil, filling baskets. Voices murmured, teaching, guiding. Children played, chasing one another through tall grass, but even in play they learned, imitating their elders, repeating gestures until instinct replaced thought. Survival was not only in muscle but in memory, not only in blood but in patience. At day's end the gatherers returned. Their baskets were heavy, their hands stained with juice, their clothes scented with earth and leaf. Around the fire their offerings were laid beside the hunters' kills. Meat, yes, but also roots, nuts, seeds, berries. Together they sustained the band, for without one, the other was incomplete. Fire roasted flesh, but it also roasted roots. Smoke preserved not only meat but nuts and grains. Gathering fed as many mouths as hunting, though the stories of it were fewer. Still within the firelight, elders sometimes spoke of plants with reverence. They told how certain leaves healed fever, how others numbed pain, how the bitter bark of one tree could keep hunger away when no prey could be found. These stories, less glorious than the charge of Mammoth, were no less important. They were the quiet heroism of survival, the thread that tied humanity, not to conquest but to understanding. To gather was to listen to the earth, to trust in its secrets, to walk with patience and humility. It did not carry the roar of battle, but it carried life forward, steady, unbroken. And so humanity endured, not only by the blood of giants, but by the quiet gifts hidden in soil and stem, waiting to be remembered. The land was vast, but its gifts were scattered, hidden, guarded by thorn and tooth. To live as a gatherer 100,000 years ago was to walk as both seeker and guardian, moving through the wilderness with eyes sharpened by necessity and memory honed by generations. Where the hunter sought the thunder of hoofs and the bellow of giants, the gatherer sought silence, the silence of roots beneath soil, the silence of seeds cradled in grass, the silence of fruit swelling in shadows. From afar, the savanna seemed empty, a sweep of golden grass beneath the blaze of sun. But to the gatherer, it was a tapestry alive with promise. Certain grasses bent heavy with seeds, their heads dark against the sky. With patient hands the gatherers shook them into woven baskets, each seed a fragment of future meals. Tubers slept beneath cracked soil, marked by faint green shoots. Children pressed sticks into earth, prying them loose, their small hands muddy, their laughter echoing. Every tuber carried calories enough to outlast hunger for another day. At the edges of rivers, gifts were hidden still deeper. Cattails rose, their roots starchy and edible, their fibers woven into mats and cords. Along the banks, reeds could be cut to carry water, their hollow bodies filled and sealed with clay. Mussels clung to stones, waiting to be pried free and roasted in fire. Fish trapped in shrinking pools were caught by hand, wriggling, silvery prizes that flashed in morning light. These quiet harvests were less dramatic than the hunt, but they sustained life just as surely. The forests told another story. Under the canopy, the air was thick, rich with the scent of soil and rain. Here fruits swelled in branches, figs soft and sweet, berries clustered in color. But danger lay here as well. Some fruits lured with brightness only to kill. Some berries shared the shape of sustenance, but carried poison enough to still a heart. The gatherers knew the difference. They tasted carefully, spitting out the bitter, teaching children the same. This red kills, this red feeds. The lesson was repeated until it carved itself into memory. Elders bore this knowledge most of all. They carried the weight of decades of trial, the scars of mistakes, the memory of seasons when certain plants failed, when drought stripped the earth bare. Around fires they told of leaves that healed wounds, of roots that cooled fever, of bark that soothed hunger when no meat could be found. These lessons passed from mouth to ear, never written, but preserved as carefully as fire itself. Gathering was patient work, but it was never safe. Leopards crouched in silence, their coats vanishing into shadow, until they exploded in strike. Snakes coiled beneath fallen leaves, their venom delivered with sudden speed. Hyenas prowled boldly, unafraid to test even groups of people. Sometimes the danger was smaller still, a thorn tearing deep into skin, a cut festering into fever. The gatherer's world was filled with risk, quieter than the hunt's chaos, but no less deadly. Still the act bound the band together. Women and men worked side by side, children trailing, learning by watching. The youngest carried small baskets, proud of their handful of seeds or berries, their contributions folded into the greater pile. Each life was woven into the task, and each task into survival. No one stood apart. The land demanded cooperation in all things. When the gatherers returned, their arms full of gifts, the camp stirred with energy. Hunters laid down their weapons. Women emptied baskets into hides spread across the ground. Children ran forward to steal tastes before being chased away with laughter. Fire came alive again, roasting tubers until their skins cracked, softening nuts, boiling leaves into bitter but sustaining stews. Around the flames, bellies filled, the tension of the day faded, and the quiet triumph of survival was shared. But even in these moments of plenty, memory was never far. For every berry sweet on the tongue, there had been another that killed. For every tuber roasted in fire, there was one that poisoned a careless hand. The people knew this, carried it in their bones, whispered it to their children. The land gave, but it tested. The earth was both mother and predator. To live from its gifts required vigilance without end. The day of the gatherer did not end when baskets were filled and bellies satisfied. In truth, the act of gathering extended beyond the hands and into the mind, into the memory, into the rhythm of the group itself. It was not only a daily chore but a way of being, a relationship with the land that shaped thought as much as body. At night, by firelight, when the hunters retold their battles with tusks and horns, the gatherers too shared knowledge. They spoke of plants not with glory but with care, their voices slower, steadier, carrying warnings and wisdom. This leaf cools the fever, this root feeds when meat cannot be found, this berry kills. Children leaned close, their faces glowing orange in the light, repeating the names in whispers, engraving them into memory, as surely as hunters remembered the curve of a mammoth's tusk. It was in this quiet passing of knowledge that culture grew. The first traditions were not songs of conquest, but songs of survival, chants naming plants, rhythms that made memory easier, stories that wrapped danger in images of spirits and curses. A poisonous berry was not only poison, it was a trickster spirit, a thief of breath. A healing root was not only food, it was the gift of ancestors, given in dream. In this way, the knowledge of the land was bound to story, and story to survival. Seasons shifted, and with them the life of the band. In times of plenty, fruit hung heavy in trees, grasses bent with seed roots, swelled beneath soft soil. The people grew strong, laughed aloud, dances rising with the crackle of fire. But the dry seasons came, and the land withered. Grass turned brittle, rivers shrank, trees dropped leaves. In those times, the memory of gatherers was tested. They led the band to hidden springs, to trees that held fruit longer than others, to roots buried deep where no grass remained. Survival was carried not by spear alone, but by memory of where food still clung to the land, and always, danger walked beside them. The act of reaching for fruit in branches might end with the flash of leopard claws. The digging of roots might uncover a coiled snake. A slow-moving child, left behind, might vanish into silence, never seen again. The land did not give its gifts freely. Every meal was earned, every bite a victory measured against risk, but it was also within gathering that humanity's first hints of settlement stirred. When people remembered where roots grew strongest, when they returned season after season to the same valley, when they stored nuts in caves or seeds in baskets, they planted the first fragile seeds of permanence. They were not yet farmers, but the idea was born. The thought that food could be found, not only by wandering, but by knowing, by returning, by shaping. The act of gathering taught patience, it taught memory, it taught reverence. Hunters brought glory, but gatherers brought endurance. Without them, the band would have starved in every season, when prey fled or hunts failed. Without them, fire would have flickered over empty hands. And so, in the silence of soil, in the bending of branches, in the cracking of nuts and the roasting of roots, the people of 100,000 years ago sustained themselves. They were not only hunters of beasts but gatherers of the earth's hidden gifts. Together, these acts bound them to the land, fragile yet enduring, small yet unbroken. To gather was to trust the earth. To gather was to listen to the voices of ancestors in every leaf and stem. To gather was to survive not only by strength, but by wisdom. And in that wisdom, humanity found not only food but the first steps toward a future where knowledge itself would become its greatest weapon.
To live 100,000 years ago was to walk in a world vast and unforgiving, where the body alone could not endure. Rain fell without warning, sun burned skin until it cracked, winds cut through bone, and predators prowled in silence. To survive such a world, the people made shelter, not houses as we know them, not walls that endured for generations, but fragile sanctuaries shaped from what the land allowed. Shelter was not permanent. The band moved with herds, with seasons, with rains. Each resting place was temporary, a pause in the endless movement across savannas, tundras, and forests. Yet within those pauses they built. Their hands pulled branches from trees, their stone blades cut saplings, their sinew bound poles into frames. Over these, they draped hides stripped from animals, thick and heavy, warm against the wind. Sometimes they bent reeds together, weaving them into domes, layering grass until rain slid off in sheets. In caves they found ready walls, black mouths opening into stone, shadows stretching deep. There they built fires, lined floors with furs, painted ceilings with smoke and memory. Each shelter was small, but within it, life was contained. Mothers rocked infants, their lullabies whispered low, the flames reflecting in their eyes. Hunters rested, their spears laid beside them, their bodies heavy with exhaustion. Children pressed close in cold nights, their breath mingling in clouds. Outside, the night pressed with its voices, lions roaring, wolves howling, wind shrieking. But inside, the circle of warmth and wall of hide gave a fragile sense of safety. Tools were the second skin of these people, extensions of their hands, their only defense against a world that outweighed them in claw and muscle. Stone was their gift, chipped with patience into blades sharp enough to cut flesh, to pierce hide, to shape wood. Flint struck against flint, each strike ringing out, sparks leaping, edges forming. The hunter's spear, hardened in fire, tipped with stone, was born from this labor. The gatherer's knife, thin and sharp, came from the same. Even bone became tool, carved into awls for piercing, into needles for sewing hides, into points hardened for fishing. Fire itself was a tool as well as a spirit. It hardened wood, preserved meat, lit darkness, and drove predators back. Carried ember to ember, it was never abandoned, never allowed to die. It was coaxed, fed, worshipped. Without fire, tools failed, hides rotted, meat spoiled, bones yielded nothing. Shelter and tool, these were the twin miracles of daily life. They did not conquer the world, but they allowed humanity to endure within it. The cave became fortress, the hide tent became womb, the spear became claw, the blade became tooth. Fragile bodies became something more, armed not with strength of flesh, but with strength of memory and invention. And in this making, in this shaping, humanity discovered itself. For each shelter built, each tool crafted, was not only survival, it was meaning. It was proof that the land could be answered, that hunger and cold and darkness were not invincible. Fragile though they were, these small creations were defiance made visible, the first echoes of civilization, hidden in the smoke of fires and the edges of stone. Shelter was more than a place to sleep. It was the fragile boundary between life and death, between belonging and exposure. A day spent hunting or foraging could exhaust the body, but without a safe refuge to return to, exhaustion could turn quickly to extinction. For the people of 100,000 years ago, building shelter was as essential as carrying fire, as vital as shaping stone. The simplest form was the circle. Branches were pulled together, their ends pressed into the earth, their tops bent inward and bound with sinew or grass. Over this frame, hides were laid, thick mammoth skins in the north, lighter antelope or deer hides in warmer lands. Grass was piled thick, reeds layered until rain slid harmless across the roof. Sometimes whole shelters were lined with mud, packed tight to seal wind from creeping in. These were no permanent dwellings. Storms could tear them down, herds could trample them, and the band itself would abandon them when food ran dry. But for a handful of nights, they became the center of the world. In the north, caves offered stronger walls. Their mouths gaped wide, dark and cold, their interiors echoing with the drip of water, the scurry of bats. At first people feared them, for the darkness seemed alive, filled with unseen predators, but fire changed that. With torches in hand, they entered, driving shadows back, filling stone halls with smoke and warmth. Caves became fortresses against ice and wind, their walls reflecting firelight, their ceilings blackened with soot. In their shelter, stories grew. Shadows on stone became shapes, became memory, became the first traces of imagination left behind in ochre and ash. Even in warmer lands, stone served as shield. Cliffs carved by rivers gave shallow alcoves. Boulders leaned together to form natural roofs. Under these, people set fires, lined the ground with grass and fur, slept with their backs against stone. The earth itself became wall and guardian, shaping a sense of belonging deeper than wood or hide could give. Tools were as essential as walls. Without them, no shelter could rise, no food could be prepared, no animal could be brought down. The shaping of stone was an art. 2 hands held flint, struck again and again, flakes flying in sharp arcs. Each blow was measured, for a single mistake could ruin the core. From these strikes came blades thin as a leaf, edges sharp enough to slice hide, to carve wood, to open flesh. The act was patient, rhythmic, almost ceremonial. Elders taught the angle of strike, the sound of stone when it fractured correctly, the feel of sharpness beneath a thumb. Wood was shaped by these blades, hardened by fire, turned into spears, digging sticks, frames for shelter. Bone was split and carved, made into needles for sewing hides, hooks for fishing, awls for piercing leather. Antlers were shaped into hammers, their tips ground to points. Nothing was wasted. Every part of the animal, every fragment of the land was given purpose. The making of tools was not silent. Around the fire, hunters chipped stone while others scraped hides, the sounds of survival echoing in rhythm, the tap of stone, the rasp of bone, the hiss of fire. Children watched, imitating with smaller pieces, their mistakes corrected by laughter, their successes praised. Knowledge flowed not from words alone, but from action, from repetition, from patience. Shelter and tools together allowed the people to endure the forces of a world designed to test them. When storms rolled across plains, when frost bit deep, when predators prowled close, it was the wall of hide, the circle of stone, the sharpened spear that stood between life and death. These creations were fragile, but they multiplied the strength of the human body 100-fold. Yet they were not only practical, they carried meaning. A well-made spear was pride, a strong shelter was safety, a basket woven tightly enough to hold seeds became a symbol of care, of foresight. In these acts, humanity began to shape more than its environment. It began to shape itself, toward memory, toward invention, toward culture. What began as survival grew into identity. Every strike of flint, every knot of sinew, every stretched hide was a declaration: we endure. And in those fragile shelters, in those sharp-edged stones, the first echoes of civilization stirred, whispering of futures still far away, but already seeded in firelight and stone. The world was not gentle. Rain fell hard and cold, winds tore across plains, frost pressed into bone, and predators prowled without pause. The human body, naked against this immensity, could not endure unaided. Shelter and tools were the answers, fragile, imperfect, but powerful in their defiance. Without them there was no tomorrow. With them there was the thin but unbroken thread of survival. Shelter began with the ground itself. Before walls were raised or hides stretched, the people looked first to the earth beneath their feet. They chose where to rest, not only by the ease of building but by the voice of the land. A hollow in the earth, shielded from wind, a slope facing morning sun to cut the night's chill, a patch of ground above flood, but near to water. These were the first decisions, the invisible architecture of the camp. Without this knowledge, walls would fail, fires would drown, people would starve. When the place was chosen, hands went to work. Some broke branches, their muscles straining against green wood. Others stripped bark, twisted grass into rope, pulled reeds from riverbanks. Children carried small bundles, their faces lit by pride at their contribution. Slowly the shape emerged, a circle, a dome, a frame that could be lifted by a single person, but strong enough to carry the hides of beasts. The hides themselves bore the memory of the hunt. Mammoth skin, so thick it took days to scrape clean, became walls against winter winds. Antelope skins, light and supple, bent easily into roofs against sun. Reindeer hides layered over one another, made floors soft against frost. Each hide was more than material, it was story. To sleep beneath mammoth skin was to sleep beneath the victory of the hunt, to be warmed not only by fur but by memory of danger overcome.
The building of shelters was a communal act. Voices murmured, hands lifted, children mimicked. There was no single builder, all were builders. Even the elder, too frail to carry weight, sat nearby, offering guidance, reminding which knots held best, which grasses endured longest. In this way, the making of shelter was also the making of memory, the passing of knowledge, the binding of generations. But not all shelters stood in the open. The earth itself offered its arms in caves and alcoves. At first these black mouths were feared. To step into them was to step into silence, into darkness so thick it seemed alive. Many caves bore the scent of beasts, bears sleeping through winter, lions dragging kills into shadow. Yet with fire, humans entered, driving back the dark. Torches flared against walls, shadows fled, and the cave became not threat but refuge. Smoke curled into ceilings, firelight danced across stone, and the cold outside lost its teeth. In these caves, tools found another life. Flint struck against flint, sending sharp flakes flying, their edges gleaming. Blades were born here, their edges sharper than claw, their points stronger than tooth. Awls of bone pierced hide, needles sewn with sinew pulled shelter together. The rhythm of work filled stone chambers, the strike of stone, the rasp of hide, the crack of marrow bone split for tools. In this labor, culture stirred. Each sound was not only survival, but a music of creation, a steady beat of defiance against the silence of the world outside. The making of tools demanded patience beyond hunger. A single stone could take hours, days to shape. One strike too many, one angle wrong, and the blade shattered. Hunters learned to feel the rhythm of flint, the song of stone beneath their hands. Elders taught it not with words alone but with demonstration, the way to hold, the place to strike, the patience to wait for the edge to appear. Tools were not accidents, they were memory preserved in stone, generation after generation. Weapons were only part of this. Digging sticks pried roots from soil, baskets woven from reeds carried seeds, hides scraped with stone knives became clothing and tents. Fire-hardened points dug into earth, turned soil, stirred anthills for insects, split shells for marrow. Even bones of prey became tools, polished, sharpened, shaped into fishhooks, needle, scrapers. Nothing was wasted. Every fragment of land, every piece of beast was turned towards survival. Shelters and tools were fragile, but they transformed existence. In their absence, humanity was animal, cold, naked, hunted. In their presence, humanity was something more, not ruler of the land, but contender, participant, dreamer. The cave became cathedral, the spear became symbol, the fire-hardened stick became future. And yet these creations were not only functional, they were reflections of meaning. A spear carried pride, not only for its sharpness, but for the skill of the hand that shaped it. A well-built shelter carried comfort, not only for its strength, but for the unity that raised it. A basket woven tightly enough to hold seeds was not only storage, but foresight, the idea that tomorrow could be planned for. In these simple acts, humanity stepped beyond the present and into time itself. So night fell, and the shelters glowed with firelight. Smoke curled upward, sparks rising into starlight. Outside, predators prowled, their eyes gleaming just beyond the circle. Inside, warmth spread, shadows danced across walls, voices murmured. Children slept pressed close to mothers, hunters dreamed with spears at their side. Elders stared into flame, remembering hunts long past. The tools lay beside them, spear, blade, scraper, silent, waiting, promises of tomorrow's endurance. In the thin line between cold stone and warm fire, between fragile walls of hide and endless dark beyond, humanity's defiance was made visible. Shelter and tool, two simple words, two fragile creations, yet they were the difference between extinction and survival. They were the first inventions, the first promises, the first steps toward the vast story yet to unfold. The wind was never still. It carried the voices of predators, the breath of storms, the shifting scent of earth itself. For the people of 100,000 years ago, it was reminder and warning, constant, unrelenting. Against this, the fragile circle of shelter stood like defiance carved into emptiness, a wall of hide against frost, a roof of grass against rain, a cave fire burning against the breath of night. It was not permanence, not fortress, but it was enough. Inside those shelters, humanity found something beyond survival. There was comfort, however fleeting. Flames painted faces with light and shadow, turning every wrinkle of age, every scar of the hunt, into stories. Mothers whispered to children, their voices soft against the crackle of fire. Hunters lay back on furs, their hands resting against their spears, their eyes heavy with exhaustion, but softened with relief. Elders sat with faraway gazes, memory alive in silence. The shelter was more than wall and roof. It was a womb of belonging. Still, it was fragile. Storms tore them down. Winds scattered reeds. Floods swallowed whole camps. Predators sometimes dared to test the circle, tearing at hides, thrusting through openings with teeth and claws. Caves too were not invincible. Bears claimed them, water drowned them, rock fell from ceilings without warning. Yet the people returned, rebuilt, reshaped. Fragility was not failure, it was reminder. The world was vast, the people small, but their will was endless. Tools lay at the center of this will. Without them the shelter could not rise. Stone blades cut wood, awls of bone pierced hides, cords of sinew bound frames together. Spears stood at the ready, not only for the hunt, but for defense of the camp itself. Scrapers thinned hides into clothing, sharp flakes split, marrow bones, fire cracked nuts and roasted roots. Around the fire, these tools gathered as surely as people did, silent extensions of their makers, waiting for the next task. And yet, tools were more than extensions, they were inheritance. Each blade held the patience of the hand that shaped it, each spear the memory of the hunt that demanded it. Elders showed children not only how to strike flint, but how to hear it, how the right blow sang, how the wrong one broke. These were not instructions spoken in long words but gestures, demonstrations, repeated acts until the child's hand echoed the elders. In this, tools became more than stone and wood. They became knowledge made physical, memory turned tangible. There was beauty in this making, though it was never named as such. The perfect edge of flint, the smooth polish of bone, the careful weaving of reeds into baskets, all were done with care that reached beyond necessity. Survival demanded only function, but the hands of humans lingered on form. A spear balanced better when carved straight, but it also pleased the hand to hold. A hide sewed tight kept out cold, but the stitch neatness brought pride. Even here in the raw edges of existence, art whispered its first breath. Night after night, in shelters across plains, forests, tundras, the same scenes unfolded. A mother mended a hide, her stone needle pressing in rhythm. A hunter chipped flint, sparks flying with each strike, his face focused, almost serene. Children played with broken stones, shaping them into pretend blades, mimicking their elders' movements. Elders spoke slowly, reminding the band of places remembered, of caves found safe, of rivers that never dried. The fire bound all together, its glow reflecting in tools, in hides, in eyes that carried both fatigue and determination. The tools and shelters of this age did not endure in stone cities or written chronicles. They rotted, burned, crumbled back into earth. But for those who lived within them, they were monuments as vast as any that would come later, for they marked the difference between life and silence, between the continuation of memory and its erasure. Each morning, when the people rose, they packed what they could carry. Hides folded, frames abandoned, embers cradled in bark. Tools were tied to belts, carried in slings, cradled in hands. The shelter behind them vanished into the land, swallowed by grass and wind. Only tracks remained, already fading, already forgotten by the earth. But in the people, the memory endured, the skill to build again, the patience to strike stone again, the fire to resist again. This was the truth of shelter and tools. They were not permanent, but neither were they lost. They lived in repetition, in memory, in the bond between elder and child, between hand and stone, between hunger and fire. Fragile though they were endless. And so the people endured. They walked into new valleys, raised new walls of hide, struck new blades from flint. They endured storms, predators, cold, famine. They endured because they carried with them more than fire. They carried invention. They carried the will to shape, to build, to create against the vast indifference of the earth. In every fragile shelter, in every sharpened blade, in every ember carried forward, the future trembled, waiting. These were the first true monuments of humanity, not stone temples, not carved statues, but the invisible continuity of memory and invention. In them lay the seed of everything yet to come.
In the open immensity of 100,000 years ago, no person stood alone. A single body, fragile and unarmed, could not outlast the cold, could not face the lion, could not endure the hunger. Survival belonged not to the individual, but to the group. Bonds were the true shelter, community the first and greatest tool. Without them there was nothing. The band was small, 20, 30, perhaps 40 at most. Faces known, voices familiar, every person bound to the others, not by choice but by necessity. Blood tied some, memory tied others, but hunger tied all. The group moved together, carrying fire, carrying tools, carrying children. Each step of the journey was shared. When one stumbled, others lifted. When one fell behind, others waited, unless danger pressed too close. When mercy gave way to survival's demand. At dawn, work divided not by law but by need. Hunters went forward with spears, eyes sharp, bodies lean with endurance. Gatherers fanned across land, baskets in hand, seeking roots, seeds, fruit. Elders watched children, their hands guiding small fingers, their voices shaping memory. Each role was vital. None stood apart. Even the youngest brought value, carrying water, chasing birds from seeds, fetching wood for fire. Life allowed no idleness. The sharing of food was the heart of these bonds. A kill did not belong to the hunter who struck it. It belonged to the band. Around fire, flesh was cut and divided. Bones split, marrow passed from hand to hand. When berries were poured from baskets, when roots were roasted, when nuts were cracked, all ate together. To hoard was betrayal, to deny was exile, and exile was death. Sharing was not kindness, it was law, the unspoken rule upon which every breath depended. Yet within this law grew something more than survival. There was affection, a mother's hand on her child's head, soothing with touch as much as with voice. A hunter laughing with another, pride and relief shining in eyes. Elders telling stories, their words binding the band not only to each other, but to the past itself. Bonds were more than exchange of food and work. They were warmth, laughter, comfort against the immensity of a hostile earth. At night, when fire lit the circle, community became visible. Children tumbled in play, their shadows leaping across hides and stone. Adults leaned close, their voices low, planning, remembering, warning. Songs rose, simple, rhythmic, carried by drums made from stretched hide, by sticks struck together, by voices rising in chorus. Even in hardship, they found rhythm, found joy. In this, humanity was more than endurance, it was spirit. But bonds carried weight as well as comfort. Quarrels broke. Envy stirred when food was scarce. Anger flared when hunts failed. Grief hardened hearts when death struck too often. Voices rose in argument. Sometimes fists followed. Yet even then the band held. Survival demanded it. A break in unity meant death. And so bonds were mended as swiftly as they frayed. Reconciliation was not choice but necessity. And from necessity grew the first fragile forms of trust, of loyalty, of belonging. To live in community was to live in a circle larger than oneself. Each person carried the weight of the others. Each person gave and took in turn. In this fragile weave of connection, humanity found its true strength. Not in claw, not in muscle, but in the invisible force of bonds. It was here, in the warmth of fire, in the circle of faces, in the voices that rose together against silence, that humanity first became more than animal. The community was not only survival, it was memory, it was learning, it was the quiet fabric upon which the fragile thread of humanity stretched forward. To walk alone in the wild was to vanish, swallowed by beasts or storm. But within the circle of the band, a person carried not only their own strength, but the strength of all. Elders were the keepers of memory, their backs bent, their steps slowed, but their voices carried the weight of decades of survival. They had seen the rivers flood, seen the forests burn, seen the skies change. They remembered when certain fruits ripened, when herds returned, when storms rose without warning. Around the fire they spoke, and their words were more than story. They were maps, calendars, warnings carved not in stone but in flesh and breath. Children listened, their eyes wide, their small bodies pressed against the warmth of family. To remember was to live, to forget was to die. Mothers and fathers carried not only the burden of their children's hunger, but their laughter, their play. Even in the harshness of the world, children ran, chased one another through grass, splashed in rivers, shrieked with joy. When berries stained their lips red, the band laughed with them, for their laughter was proof of endurance, proof that the world had not yet broken them. To raise a child was not the duty of one but of all. Hands reached to soothe, arms carried the weak, voices hushed the restless. Childhood was not private, but shared, each life woven into the community's fabric. The hunters bore scars not only on their skin but in their silence. They walked with pride, yes, but also with burden. They had seen death close, companions trampled, gored, torn by predators. Around the fire they retold their hunts with voices loud, their hands sweeping in wide arcs, their faces lit by flame. But when the stories ended, when the laughter faded, silence returned to their eyes. Community softened this silence, a hand on a shoulder, a song rising in chorus, food shared in equal measure. These things healed wounds that stone and fire could not. Conflict was inevitable. Hunger sharpened anger, fear twisted into suspicion. Two voices rose sharp as flint, over the division of food, over the path to take, over the memory of past mistakes. Sometimes hands struck, sometimes blood was drawn, but conflict too was absorbed by the band. Elders intervened, words calmed, reconciliation demanded, not for kindness, for survival. To remain divided was to weaken the whole, and weakness was death. Bonds frayed, but they were always mended, stitched together by necessity, until they grew into something stronger than necessity itself. The fire was the anchor. Around it, the band was more than individuals. They were one body, one breath, one voice. The glow of flames lit their faces, made shadows leap and dance across hides and stone. Stories rose, not only of hunts and plants but of spirits imagined in the dark. A bird that cried at night was said to carry souls. A river that flooded without warning was called angry. Stars above were not distant but present, ancestors watching, guiding, warning. These were not yet religions, not yet gods, but they were beginnings, the weaving of imagination into community, the making of meaning out of survival, and meaning bound them as tightly as hunger did. To believe together was to belong together. To sing the same song was to remember the same truths. To share story was to share more than knowledge. It was to share identity. So the community endured, not only by food, not only by fire, but by the invisible bond of belonging. This bond carried them across rivers, across storms, across generations. It was stronger than stone, stronger than spear. It was the first true invention of humanity, the circle of many standing as one. In the wild world of 100,000 years ago, bonds were not luxury, not ornament, but lifeblood. Alone, a human was prey. Together they became something greater, a network of hands, of voices, of memories that reached beyond a single lifetime. The animals had strength, claws, horns, speed. The people had only each other. The circle was everything. It began with fire. As dusk fell, flames lit faces, shadows flickered across hides, and the boundaries of the group became clear. Those inside the light were us, those outside were other. The fire was more than warmth. It was a line of belonging, the place where bonds were seen, tested, reaffirmed. Here food was divided. The hunter who risked death against mammoth or bison did not eat first. The gatherer who spent hours in the sun digging roots did not keep their find. Instead, the meat, the roots, the berries, all were placed at the center, and hands reached together. This act, repeated night after night, forged unity deeper than blood. To share food was to share fate. To deny food was to deny life itself. Children grew inside this circle of sharing. From their first steps, they were watched not only by their mothers but by the group. A crying infant was hushed by many voices, carried in many arms. Knowledge flowed into them not in lessons but in life itself. The elder handing a stone and showing how to strike.
the gatherer pointing at a berry and naming it safe or deadly, the hunter letting a child's hand grasp the shaft of a spear, feeling its weight. Learning was communal, survival was communal. Childhood was not a private journey, but a shared preparation for the endless challenges ahead. The old, too, belonged. In many bands, age carried weakness, backs bent, hands trembled, eyes clouded, yet these elders were not cast aside. Their bodies might fail, but their minds were full of memory. They were the walking libraries of the band, keepers of knowledge that could not yet be written, protectors of stories that stretched further back than any living person could remember. They recalled where rivers ran deepest in drought, where caves shielded best against wind, where roots could be found when the land seemed bare. They knew which plants healed fever, which bark soothed hunger, which stars marked the coming of rain. Their wisdom was survival. To lose them was to lose maps written in memory alone. The sick and wounded were carried, tended, cared for. Bones broken in the hunt were splintered with wood, bound with hide, nursed in the safety of fire. Fevered brows were cooled with leaves dipped in water, bodies pressed close to share warmth. Not all survived, but the act of care itself was proof of bond, proof that the group was more than a collection of hungry bodies. They had compassion, even when it cost them. This compassion was not weakness, it was strength. It bound the group tighter, reminded each member that if they fell, others would lift them. Conflict too was part of community. Voices clashed, sharp as stone against stone. Arguments flared over food, over direction, over blame when hunts failed, or sickness spread. Yet these conflicts rarely tore the group apart. They were absorbed, softened, mended by ritual and necessity. An elder's voice calmed, a shared feast reconciled. The birth of a child, the success of a hunt, the danger of predators. These moments bound the band back together, reminding them that survival outweighed division, and in their unity, imagination took root. Firelight was not only warmth but stage. Around it, stories unfolded, hands gestured, voices rose, shadows danced against stone walls. Children laughed, adults listened, elders nodded. Some stories warned, tales of the berry that killed, of the river that drowned, of the beast too dangerous to face. Others explained the unexplainable, the roar of thunder as the voice of sky spirits, the flood of river as the anger of earth, the stars as ancestors burning above. These stories were not idle, they were glue, holding the band together in shared belief, shared meaning. Songs rose too, rhythms beaten on logs, on stone, on stretched hides, voices joining in chorus, repeating patterns until they seemed to echo the heartbeat of the land. Dancing feet stamped into earth, circling fire, circling community itself. Through song and dance, unity was not only remembered but felt in the body. The band became one voice, one rhythm, one defiance against the immensity of wilderness. Thus bonds were more than survival, they were identity. The band was not simply a group of individuals, it was a living being, greater than the sum of its parts. Within it, memory survived, laughter endured, children grew, the sick were healed, the old were honored. In its circle, the fragile spark of humanity burned brighter than in any solitary soul. The beasts ruled the land, the rivers carved the earth, the storms owned the sky, but within their small circles of fire, the people ruled themselves, bound together by bonds stronger than tooth or claw. The circle of community was fragile, yet it was the strongest thing humanity possessed. Against the storms, against the hunger, against the beasts, it was not the spear alone, not the fire alone, that preserved life. It was the bond between people. 100,000 years ago, the truest shelter was not hide or stone, but the embrace of community itself. When the band moved, they moved as one. Hunters carried spears and weapons, gatherers carried baskets and knowledge of the land, elders carried memory, mothers and fathers carried children, children carried hope. Each step was shared, each danger faced together. They crossed rivers in chains of hands, pulling one another against the current. They climbed cliffs in lines, each helping the next. No one left behind. The path of survival was not solitary. It was woven from dozens of footsteps, dozens of voices, dozens of breaths rising into the same air. Death, inevitable and near, was also shared. When a member of the band fell, struck by predator, broken in hunt, stilled by sickness, The grief belonged to all. The body was not left to beasts if it could be carried. Hands dug shallow graves, covered flesh with soil, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with red ochre scraped from stone. The burial was not merely disposal, it was ritual, acknowledgement that the lost one remained part of the band even in silence. Children watched with wide eyes, learning that life was not only survival but remembrance. The dead did not vanish, they lived in story, in warning, in the bonds that endured beyond breath. Birth was the opposite ritual, as powerful as death. The cry of a newborn was not only a mother's joy, but the joy of the group. Many hands reached, many voices cooed, many arms carried. The child was not one person's alone but all. Each new life was promised that the fire would not go out, that the memory would continue, that the circle would not break. In this way, the band became more than survival. It became continuity. It was the thread that stretched backward into ancestors, forward into unborn generations. The people did not yet know words like lineage or bloodline, but they felt them. To sit by the fire surrounded by voices and faces was to know belonging that extended beyond the self. The predators knew none of this. The lion prowled alone. The wolf hunted in packs but without memory beyond hunger. Humanity's strength was not muscle, not speed. It was bond. It was the invisible net that tied each life to another, made the pain of one, the pain of all, the triumph of one, the triumph of all. In this invisible net lay the secret of endurance, and as night fell, as the fire burned low, this truth glowed brightest. The people gathered close, their shoulders touching, their voices low. Outside, the darkness pressed with its endless dangers. Inside, they were not alone. They were a circle of many small, against the immensity of earth and sky, but bound by something stronger than any storm. Bonds and community. These were humanity's first true home, not the cave, not the hide tent, not the spear or fire. The true shelter was one, and the true weapon was unity, and in that unity, fragile and flickering, the seed of everything to come was already planted.
The sky was the oldest storyteller, and its voice was thunder. Long before words had edges, before memory learned to braid itself into story, people looked up and felt the air tighten, smelled metal on the wind, and knew the world was about to speak. Clouds gathered like mountains torn loose from the horizon and driven across the plains. They rolled upon themselves dark on darker, and the light beneath them turned the color of old bone. Birds vanished. Insects fell silent. Even the grass seemed to hush. The people stopped where they stood and listened, as if listening could steady the sky. Lightning came first as a distant thought at the rim of vision, a thin seam of white that opened and closed so quickly the mind doubted it. Then again closer, splitting the sky from crown to root, a tree of fire branching in an instant. Thunder followed, the earth answering its own wound. It did not merely sound, it pressed into skin and bone, arriving like a shove from a giant rippling through rib and spine. Children flinched. Elders watched the line of the storm with measuring eyes, judging direction, counting breaths between light and answer. They had learned the storm's language, its hunger for high places, its jealousy of lone trees, its love of open water. They had learned how the wind turned before the first drop fell, how the scent of the world changed when the clouds were ready to break. When rain finally came, it fell with ferocity, an army of arrows drumming earth and leaf and hide. Heat fled before it. Dust rose in a smell like old memory, that first breath of petrichor that seemed to lift the dead from their sleep. Drops were large enough to sting. Riverbeds woke roaring, gullies braided silver in moments, and dry places remembered they had once been water. The people leaned into it, letting it wash salt from skin, letting it plaster hair to scalp, and then when the air turned from promise to threat, they moved as one, seeking cover where they could under rock lips, into shallow caves, beneath the bunched shoulders of boulders, against the leeward side of a standing tree, never the tallest. Hides were thrown over frames, arms reached to hold edges down, ropes of twisted grass went taut. The world around them blurred into water and noise. Storms did not belong to any one land. On the savannas, lightning walked fast strides, striking dry stalks and setting the grass alight. Fire ran in veils before the rain caught it, a red skin skittering across the world, hissing when the downpour overtook its feet. On the steppes, wind traveled in long, clean currents that seemed to scrape sound from the air, driving rain sideways in sheets that whipped the faces of those who turned into it. In the forests, thunder was a prisoned thing, crashing from trunk to trunk, echoing until even the hollow places in the body rang with it. In the north, the sky did its work with snow, not rain. The clouds lowered until they were nearly part of the ground, and then they let fall a slow, unending field of white sound, soft as ash, relentless as time. The people had learned to watch the edge of a storm more carefully than its heart. The edge was where lightning ran along the ground looking for a home, where wind suddenly changed its mind, where a clear horizon could vanish as if a dark cloth had been pulled over the eyes. They had learned how storms birth other storms, how a gust front announces itself with dust and a line of bending grass, how a sudden cold breath on a hot day is warning enough to seek lower ground, how the deep belly of a cloud can acquire a spinning intent that means the very air has chosen to become rope and whip. In such moments they did not argue with the sky. They flattened themselves into the earth as if returning to it, pressing faces to wet soil, forming a human braid of arms and legs around children and elders, trusting weight and touch to keep each other from being lifted away. Fear had its place, but awe was the strongest feeling. Lightning revealed the world one blade of white at a time. In that split-second sight, the people saw everything at once. The river kicked into froth, the backs of fleeing antelope like tossed stones, the hair of the lions blown sideways as if they too were grass, the faces of companions held still as masks. Then the dark took everything back, and the thunder said, "You were not meant to keep that sight." Again and again the sky opened its lid and shut it, and the people learned to see by memory, to hold those brief visions like coals between their fingers, long after the storm had moved on. Sometimes lightning touched the ground and decided to stay. Trees became torches, their sap turning to steam within them until they exploded in panels, sending sparks into the world like 1,000 new suns. Dry grass learned the taste of flame and ran with it, and the people stood at a distance, eyes narrowed, measuring wind. Fire of the sky was different from fire born of ember. It had no loyalty. It did not care about circles of stone, about watchful hands, about the careful layering of small twig, larger stick, thicker branch. It arrived as if the world had struck flint against itself and could not stop. Then the lesson became movement. The band swung wide to dodge the burning runs, reading the wind like a river. Here it will leap the creek, there it will falter in the green, here the rocks will cut its feet. They kept to the backs of the flames when they could, feeling the heat on their cheeks like a warning not to turn. Sometimes the storm had already moved on and the rain not yet arrived, and then the fire traveled unchecked, a long-limbed animal with a hunger for horizon. At night its light drew predators and prey alike, and the people watched from safety as shadows larger than life walked the orange ground. Storms made gifts as well as threats. When the rain was done, the land was different. Water pooled in hollows deep enough to mirror the sky. Rivers that had been stingy with their fish became generous again, their shallows crowded with the flick of silver bellies. The ground turned soft enough to give up tubers without a fight. Trackways printed themselves cleanly, a language newly written overnight, easy to read, the three-toed stamp of ostrich, the paired hearts of antelope, the wide, round, careful step of elephant, the comma of snake, the starburst of bird, the bare human foot traveling, returning. Children traced those prints with fingers and then with their own feet, learning how distance looks when seen in a single step. There were storms of cold as keen as storms of water. Sometimes, even beneath a high sun, the wind arrived with teeth. It hollowed the cheeks and made fire more than comfort, made it an altar to which the hands continually returned. Clouds knit together and lowered, the distance between ground and sky shrinking until it seemed a hand could reach up and tear them. Snow came like a million small decisions. It covered every story the earth had written, made all ground new and featureless. Then the people relied on other signs, the trampled paths of reindeer that pressed a corridor through whiteness, the dark stain of a lichen patch that always faced a certain way, the memory of where a rock shoulder out of the ground had made a windbreak year after year. They crafted storms into their stories. Around the fire, when the air was still and the stars were clean and unmoving, hands gestured the great roll of thunder, fingers spat out the zigzag of lightning, mouths hissed the march of rain.
Children, drowsy and fed, sat with heads nodding against knees, receiving the storm for the first time through story before they received it from the sky. Elders taught which trees were honest in a storm, which would split themselves into knives, which caves drank water quietly, and which spat it back in a sudden flood. How the safest ground is sometimes not the highest but the gentlest slope, the place the water does not love. The elements were not enemies, not exactly. The people learned to say them as names, not accusations. Wind had moods. It could be coaxed to carry scent away from a hunt, to carry the call of a companion farther than a hand could throw a stone. Rain could be a blessing held in the mind for months afterward, a day whose memory tasted like counsel and laughter. Even cold in its way was teacher. It arranged the people against one another at night in careful coils. It taught the value of hide sewn properly. It praised the hand that could feel the difference between a fire that would live until dawn and one that would die in the watch's third hour. There were days when the sky threatened and did nothing. The land waited beneath a lid of cloud, the light strange as if filtered through an old water skin. Animals held themselves low. Sweat came without work. The air was full of the smell of rain that refused to fall. Those were the most dangerous days, when judgment could falter. Should the band move to water now, losing the hours of hunting? Should they stay, trusting that the sky would keep its water? Elders squinted into the distance, remembering other days like this one, and spoke softly. The band followed those voices because it had learned the cost of ignoring them. Many costs have no graves, and there were nights when the sky put its weapons away and became a ceiling of kindness. The Milky Way laid itself from one end of the world to the other. The moon rose slow, honey-colored, a coin set on the mountain's rim and then lifted higher. Owls flew like thrown thoughts. Hyenas whooped on their own business and left the circle of fire alone. In the hush between gusts, the river hummed to itself as if counting. On such nights the people sat long, their eyes soft, their voices quiet, their hands open to each other. They spoke of storms as if of old friends, the one that filled the hidden spring, the one that broke the fig tree that had fed them for years, the one that found a lightning path through the very center of their circle and made them carry fire under skins for 3 days, while the sky remembered how to be gentle. In time the elements threaded themselves into the band's choices the way sinew threads a spear point to its shaft. A day of high, thin clouds meant travel could be long without heat striking the crown of the head. A wind that smelled of the sea, even if the sea was many days' walk away, meant coolness by evening and a safer fire. The first tall towers of cloud on the horizon in the dry season meant change was coming, and that certain animals would turn their heads towards certain valleys. They learned that a stand of trees which always stood green when others browned must have a route into hidden water, that the flat stones laid a certain way across a hillside, by the hands of no one they knew, meant the ground beneath them remembered a flood, and would remember again. The elements did not explain themselves, they did not negotiate, they offered and withdrew. The people did not curse them, they made room for them in the shape of their days. They set their shelters with the wind's hand in mind, building low when the air ran fast, building under stone when it ran cold. They hoisted infants high when lightning was near, as if height itself were protection, and then learned better, learned to lay their children low against the earth, and lay themselves over them like shields, until the thunder had counted itself to silence. Once lightning struck close enough to lift the hair on every head, and put iron in the mouth. The tree that took the blow leapt apart, a strip of bark as long as a man's body went flying and landed like a dead snake at the fire's edge. Smoke rose from the tree's heart. The band stood in a ring around it, silent, until one of the elders stepped forward and pressed a palm against the scorched wood, as if greeting an old companion. Later, when the rain had finished its work and the air smelled clean again, the elder sat and told how the sky and the earth sometimes touch in anger and sometimes in love, and that if you could stand still enough in such a moment, you might hear them speaking. No one asked what they said. It seemed a question that would frighten the answer away. The elements taught humility, they taught proportion, they taught the limits of flesh and the uses of company. A storm could be outrun if you started early. It could be outweighted if your shelter was good. It could be outwitted if your memory was long, but it could not be defeated. The people learned to shape their courage to that truth. to make a bravery that did not demand mastery but sought belonging. When wind pushed, they bent. When rain fell, they caught it and drank. When cold pressed, they wrapped one another in hide and breath. When thunder spoke, they listened. And in listening, they became a part of the world that had made them small, yes, and fragile, but placed exactly where courage mattered most, between the first flash and the last echo.
When the sun sank and the horizon bled its last red, the savanna did not fall silent. It shifted ownership. By day, humans walked it cautiously, following herds, digging roots, crossing the grasslands in long, patient lines. But when the shadows stretched long, the land remembered its true rulers. The night belonged to the hunters with golden eyes, to the lions whose roars shook marrow and rattled memory itself. The roar was not sound alone. It was a presence, a force that carried for miles, filling the air, making birds lift in panic from their nests, making hyenas hush, making even elephants pause. For the people, hearing that roar in the distance was reminder and warning. You are not alone. You are never alone. They knew its weight, its meaning. A lion was not beast alone. It was a spirit of the plains, a shadow with claws, a reminder that the people walked fragile paths in borrowed territory. At night, the campfire glowed small against the vast dark, but outside its circle, lions moved like ghosts. Their paws pressed silently into dust, their bodies lowered into grass. The people could not see them, but they felt them, the eyes watching, the patience waiting. Children were pulled closer to mothers, elders pressed wood into the fire to keep flames high, hunters gripped spears until their knuckles whitened. For all their weapons, for all their courage, they knew this truth. If the fire failed, if the circle broke, the lions would come. The hunt of lions was different from the chaos of human hunts. They did not chase endlessly across plains. They did not rely on tools or fire. They waited, they circled, they watched. They chose the weak, the slow, the unaware. In this, the people saw themselves reflected. Both species were hunters. Both sought meat, not out of cruelty, but out of hunger. Both watched, measured, struck, and yet for all the similarity, the balance of power was not equal. One mistake, one ember lost, one step too far into grass, and the people became prey. Sometimes the lions tested the edge of fire. Eyes glowed yellow at the rim of sight, low and steady. A shape moved, muscles shifting beneath fur, a tail twitching. Hunters leapt to their feet, spears raised, firebrands lifted, voices shouted, harsh and sharp, meant not only to frighten but to remind themselves of courage. The lions held their ground, unblinking. Then, with a slow turn, they slipped back into darkness, leaving the people shaking but alive. Not always. There were nights when lions struck, a careless sleeper too near the edge, a child wandering before dawn, a band too weary to tend their fire. The attack was sudden, silence broken by a rush, a scream, the tearing of flesh. Panic erupted, spears thrown wildly, flames snatched from embers to brandish against the night. Sometimes they drove the lions back, sometimes they did not. And in the morning, grief lay heavy in the camp, the ground marked by blood, the circle smaller by one. The people told these stories not to frighten, but to remember. Around fires, elders retold the times when lions came, mimicked the roar, described the eyes gleaming in dark. Children listened wide-eyed, learning the lesson: stay near the fire, stay near the group, watch the grass. Lions were not only beasts, they were teachers, pressing humans into vigilance, into unity. Without them, perhaps fire would not have been guarded so fiercely. Perhaps bonds would not have been tied so tightly. The savanna was not humanity's alone. It was shared ground, contested ground. Lions ruled the night with silence and patience. Humans claimed the day with fire and tools. Between them stretched the fragile hours of dusk and dawn, when both species walked and watched one another. In those hours the balance was clearest. Two hunters, bound by hunger, bound by the same earth, bound by the same fragile survival. And in this balance lay a truth as old as fire. The people endured not by strength greater than lions, but by courage equal to theirs. The cold lands did not fall silent at night, beneath skies heavy with stars, where snow stretched endless and the air itself seemed to harden in the lungs. Other hunters ruled. They did not roar like lions. did not strike with sudden claws from the grass. They sang. Their voices rose into the frozen air as one, a chorus of hunger and unity. The wolves of the tundra, the grey shadows of the north. The howl was not a sound to ignore. It traveled across miles of ice, carried by winds sharp enough to cut skin. One voice began, long and mournful, rising like smoke into the dark. Another answered, closer, then another farther. Soon the night was braided with sound, a net of voices cast across the frozen plain. The people huddled near their fire, pressing shoulders tight, their faces turned upward, listening. They knew what the howls meant. The wolves had found their scent. The pack was awake. Unlike lions, the wolves did not stalk alone. They moved as many, a flowing current of bodies, each step coordinated, each breath shared. Their eyes glowed faintly in the starlight, low to the ground, always watching. They did not rush the fire, did not test with sudden leaps. They circled, they waited, they paced the edge of flame with patient hunger, their bodies melting into the snow, their paws silent. They were not driven by boldness, but by endurance, by numbers, by the knowledge that hunger could outlast fire if fire faltered. The people had learned their tactics. Wolves harried. They struck not at strength but at weakness. A hunter who limped, a child who strayed, a woman carrying too much wood. All were prey if they fell behind. The pack did not need to kill quickly. It needed only to follow, to press, to wait until fatigue or fear opened a crack. Then they rushed together, a storm of teeth and muscle, each bite small but relentless, each body adding to the others until the victim was swallowed. And yet, there was respect between predator and prey. The people knew the wolves were mirrors of themselves. They hunted in groups. They relied on communication. They endured not by strength alone but by cooperation. In the howling voices of the pack, the people heard an echo of their own fireside songs, their own unity. Wolves were teachers, as much as they were threats. They showed the power of many over the fragility of one. When the pack pressed too close, the people raised their spears, lifted their torches, shouted into the dark. Flames hissed, sparks leapt, voices rose in defiance. The wolves paced, their eyes glimmering, their breath steaming in clouds. For long minutes the standoff endured, humans in their small circle of fire, wolves in their larger circle of night. Sometimes the pack relented, drifting away, their howls receding into distance. Other times hunger overruled caution, and the rush came. Spears thrust, firebrands swung, screams and snarls tangled in the air. Some humans fell, some wolves did. The snow recorded it all, crimson blooming against white. By dawn the survivors rose with frost on their lashes, their fire low, their bodies trembling. They carried the memory of wolves in their blood, the knowledge that they had faced the night and endured, but only barely. Children listened as elders retold the battle, their voices grave, their eyes fixed on the horizon. The lesson was clear: never wander alone, never let the fire die, never forget that the night listens. And yet the wolves lingered in more than fear. Over generations, the people began to see them differently. They admired their endurance, their loyalty to the pack, their tireless pursuit of prey. Around the fire they spoke of wolves as more than enemies. They were rivals, yes, but also guides, beings that carried in their bodies a wisdom not unlike their own. Some even believed wolves carried spirits, that their howls were voices of ancestors calling across the plain. Predators, teachers, reflections. The wolves were all of these, and in their company, humanity learned one of its oldest truths. Survival was not for the solitary. To live in the frozen tundra, to face the endless night, one must be like the wolves, united, tireless, bound to one another by invisible threads, stronger than hunger, stronger even than fear. The night in the forest did not roar like the savanna, did not sing like the tundra. It whispered. Leaves shifted softly in the dark, branches creaked above, insects hummed without pause, and within those whispers, unseen, the leopard moved. Unlike the lion, it did not declare itself with thunderous voice. Unlike the wolf, it did not reveal its presence in a chorus of howls. The leopard was silence itself, a shadow among shadows, a predator that killed before fear even had time to rise. Its power lay not in numbers, not in noise, but in patience.
Leopards waited where branches bent low, where paths narrowed, where rivers forced a pause. Their coats, dappled with rosettes, melted into light and dark, so perfectly married to the forest that even when eyes looked straight at them, they seemed no more than patches of leaf and shade. The people knew this camouflage. They feared it most, for what could be fought if it could not be seen? The attack came sudden, always sudden, a rustle above, the snap of a branch, then weight crashing down from the canopy, claws pierced flesh before a cry could form, jaws closed on throat, cutting air and voice together. By the time others turned, the victim was already gone, dragged upward into the trees where no spear could reach. Silence fell again, as if the forest had swallowed the sound of death. The people learned the signs, not many, but enough. Birds exploding into flight without reason, a branch bending though no wind moved, a hush too deep, too sudden, in the insect chorus. Elders taught children to stop when such signs appeared, to gather close, to lift their eyes into the canopy. Spears pointed not at the ground, but at the branches above. Fire was carried high, torches lifted to pierce shadow. Still, even with vigilance, the leopard often had its way. Unlike lions or wolves, it did not test with patience, did not circle or wait for weakness. It struck where it pleased, when it pleased, and vanished. It did not fear fire as deeply as others. The glow of flame reached upward poorly, leaving black pockets in trees where eyes could not see. A leopard could crouch there for hours, waiting for embers to dim, waiting for a single figure to step aside. It was not strength alone that terrified. It was the knowledge that no amount of courage could make the invisible visible, and yet, the people respected it. Around fire they spoke of the leopard as more than beast. It was a spirit of shadow, a reminder that the world held dangers unseen. Some said its spots were stars fallen from the sky, giving it power to vanish into the dark. Others said it was ancestor-made predator, punishing those who wandered too far from the circle. In every story, it was teacher as well as terror. The people adapted. They cut thorn branches and laid them in thick walls around their camps, barriers that slowed the leopard's silent step. They kept children close to the fire, their small forms always within reach of arms and spears. They lifted their shelters low against stone cliffs, backs protected, eyes turned outward, and still they knew none of it was certain. The leopard could always come. This was the lesson it carved into memory. Danger is not always loud. It does not always announce itself with roar or howl. Sometimes it comes in silence, in shadow, in patience. And to survive, one must learn to see what is not seen, to fear what is not heard, to guard against what waits without warning. In the forests and woodlands of that ancient world, the people did not walk alone. Above them, in branches and shadow, padded the silent teacher of mortality, cloaked in spots, carrying the stillness of death in every step. Water was not only life, it was also death, patient and waiting. Rivers and lakes fed the people, gave them fish, cooled their bodies, watered their tools of wood and hide. But every step toward the bank carried risk, for beneath the smooth surface, still as stone, eyes watched. Flat, unblinking, ancient, the crocodile was there, a shadow longer than a man, older than memory itself. The people knew the signs, a ripple where none should be, a log that seemed too steady in a current, a silence among birds that should have been calling. Children were taught never to step close alone, never to lean far over, never to drink without another watching. Yet even with caution, the river claimed lives. A hunter bending to fill a skin, gone in a burst of water, a child playing too near, snatched in a spray of foam. The sound was always the same, the sudden crash, the thrash of tail, the scream cut short, then silence, broken only by ripples widening outward, and the river looking once again calm, as if it had done nothing at all. The crocodile did not rush blindly. It waited, motionless for hours, days even, its body hidden, its mind empty but for hunger. When the moment came, it struck with violence beyond measure, jaws closed with force enough to shatter bone, teeth curved to hold, not to let go. The body of the victim was dragged under, rolled, broken, hidden in underwater larders, wedged beneath roots and stone. To the people, it was a predator of nightmare, invisible, silent, certain. Fire could not stop it, spears could not reach it. Once it struck, Nothing saved you, and yet, rivers could not be abandoned. They were veins of survival, so the people adapted. They carved long poles to test the water's edge, to stir the surface before stepping close. They learned where crocodiles favored, still pools shaded banks, and they avoided them, choosing open, fast-moving shallows instead. They watched the eyes of birds, the sudden panic of monkeys, the hush of frogs. Nature itself gave warnings. If one learned to listen, if crocodiles ruled the waters, the serpents ruled the dark places of earth and tree. Great pythons, boas, anacondas, names unknown, bodies familiar. They coiled among branches, their weight bending wood, their bodies patterned like shadow itself. Unlike the leopard, they did not strike from speed, they struck from silence. One moment, the path was clear. The next, coils wrapped around chest and limb, squeezing breath out in silence. No roar, no scream, only the slow crush of muscle, until lungs collapsed and the world went black. Others struck with venom, a step into grass, a rustle, a flash, and fire burned in the blood. Limbs swelled, vision blurred, hearts failed. Some bites killed within hours, others within days, but the lesson was always the same. Walk carefully, always watch where feet land, always scan before reaching into darkness. Children learned by mimicry, tapping sticks in grass before stepping, listening for the sudden warning hiss. Many lessons were written in scars, some were written in graves. At night, when firelight pushed shadows into shifting shapes, serpents haunted imagination. As much as crocodiles haunted water, they were the earth's silent assassins, its hidden ropes of death. Around the fire, people told stories of them as spirits, guardians of rivers, punishers of the careless, keepers of secrets. They spoke of them with awe, as much as with fear, for a predator that kills without sound, without chase, without warning, is something more than flesh. It is mystery itself, wearing scales. Together, crocodile and serpents reminded the people that danger lived not only in roar or howl, not only in the visible hunt of claw and fang. Some dangers were stillness itself, waiting in silence, watching from water or shadow. They taught vigilance, patience, humility. They taught that life could end not with warning, but with absence, a sudden gap in the circle, a face never seen again. And so the people lived with them, feared them, learned from them. They guarded their children, raised their fires higher, walked more carefully along riverbanks and forest paths. Predators ruled the night, and the day too, but humanity endured, not because it conquered, but because it remembered.
The land was never still, neither were the herds. 100,000 years ago, survival meant movement, always, endlessly, relentlessly. The animals walked first, antelope in restless waves, bison in dark tides across the horizon, mammoths in solemn processions that shook the ground with every step. Behind them, shadows smaller but no less determined, came the people. The herds were life. Their flesh filled the belly, their hides clothed the body, their bones became tools, their fat fed the fire. To lose them was to starve. And so the people followed, across grass that grew high as shoulders, across plains so vast they seemed to have no edge, across valleys where the earth itself rolled like waves frozen in time, their eyes fixed always on the horizon, seeking the dust, the distant shimmer of movement, the thunder of hooves felt through the soles of the feet. The following was not simple. It was not a walk but a trial, as harsh as the hunt itself. The herds moved with seasons, with rains, with rivers swelling and drying. They walked paths remembered not by one life, but by generations of instinct, lines carved into the land by centuries of feet. The people could only read these trails, trying to guess where the herds would turn, where they would pause, where they would vanish. A wrong guess meant hunger. A failed pursuit meant death. Days stretched into weeks. The band carried what it could, hides bundled with food, tools strapped to backs, embers cradled in bark to keep fire alive. Children were hoisted onto shoulders when their small legs failed. Elders leaned on sticks, their voices guiding direction even when their bodies faltered. The pace was slow compared to the animals they chased, but it was steady, relentless, enduring. Humanity's strength was not speed, not muscle. It was persistence, the refusal to stop. The plains tested this persistence. Heat hammered without mercy, turning the air into wavering mirages, making every step heavy, every breath labored, thirst gnawed deeper than hunger. At night, cold swept down like an unseen hand, stealing warmth, biting into skin. Fire became salvation, its circle not only a shield against predators, but a barrier against the freezing dark. The herds themselves were not blind to their followers. They knew the smell, the shape of predators at their heels. Sometimes they shifted their paths, leading people into broken lands of thorn and rock, where every step cut flesh, where rivers ran in twisting mazes. Sometimes they stampeded, a thunderous wall that no human could hope to outrun. The people learned to watch their moods, to sense their rhythms. They knew the twitch of tails, the sudden stiffening of heads, the ripple of unease that spread through a herd like wind through grass. These signs were warnings: lions near, storms coming, danger hidden. The herds were guides as much as prey, their movements telling stories of the land's secrets, and always, hunger pressed at the edges. When the herds were near, hope rose, bellies grumbled not with despair but with anticipation. When the herds vanished over a ridge or into forests, silence grew heavy. Every face turned hollow, every step heavier. In those days of absence, the people survived on roots, on berries, on what the gatherers could find, but eyes always turned back to horizon, searching for dust, for thunder, for life. The migration was not only necessity, it was identity. To walk was to live, to follow was to endure. The band carried its story in its movement, each journey a chapter, each step a word. Fires were lit in valleys where no fire had burned before. Songs were sung beneath skies never seen. Children were born on trails older than memory itself. The path was not just survival, it was the first road of humanity, written in footprints across the earth. And in this endless following, in this chasing of giants across the plains, humanity learned one of its greatest truths. Life is not rooted, life is carried, life is pursuit. The path of migration was never gentle, it was written in obstacles, in barriers carved by the earth to test the will of those who walked it. To follow the herds meant not only chasing across open plains, but crossing the raw bones of the world itself, rivers deep and merciless, mountains sharp as teeth, deserts vast as the sky. The rivers came first, silver snakes uncoiling across the land, their currents swift, their waters swollen by rains. From a distance they shone like salvation, glimmering with the promise of thirst quenched, of fish to be caught, of reeds to be gathered. But up close they revealed themselves as danger. Their currents pulled strong enough to tear a body from the arms of its kin, their depths hiding jaws and scales. Children were carried on shoulders, elders clung to hands, baskets lifted above heads. Hunters cut long poles to test each step, plunging into mud, bracing against flow. Some made it, others vanished, swept away in silence, their cries drowned in the roar of water. The river gave and the river took, and the people learned to approach it with reverence, never with haste. Then came the mountains. They rose not like gentle hills, but like walls against the sky, jagged, black, crowned with snow. The herds passed through valleys cut between them, narrow paths where shadows lingered even at noon. The people followed, pressing their hands to cold stone, their feet bleeding on sharp rock. The air thinned, every breath a struggle, every step a battle with the weight of body and the weakness of lungs. Wind screamed through passes, carrying voices away, turning fire useless. Nights froze even the marrow, yet they climbed, because the herds climbed, because hunger did not wait. In the high places, storms arrived without warning. Clouds rolled over peaks, blotting out sun, and snow fell in veils that erased the trail in moments. The world turned white and endless, and only memory kept the people moving. Memory of the valley below, memory of the herd ahead, memory of the need to endure. When the wind cleared, they stood above the world, looking down at plains stretched to the horizon, their breath steaming in the thin air, their bodies trembling but alive. Beyond the mountains lay the deserts, lands without shadow, without mercy. The sand stretched endless, rippling like water, shimmering with heat that made the eyes see what was not there. Lakes, trees, relief that vanished when approached. The sun struck down without pause, burning skin, drying tongues until speech cracked. Nights turned cold as stone,
stars bright and endless but cruel in their indifference. The herds moved quickly here, their hooves carrying them to the far side where water still lingered, where grass still grew. The people stumbled after, their steps slow, their footprints already erased by wind. They carried fire carefully, shielding embers from wind in bundles of bark. They rationed water, drops passed from palm to palm, each sip a treasure. Children cried until their voices broke, then fell silent, their faces drawn. Elders staggered, their strength thinning, their words fading to whispers. Some did not rise again. The desert claimed them, covering them in sand as if erasing their memory. The band pressed on, grief heavy but silent, because to stop was to die with them. And yet, even in deserts, even in mountains, even in rivers, there were gifts. Rivers, though deadly, gave fish and fresh water. Mountains, though cruel, gave caves for shelter and stone for sharper blades. Deserts, though merciless, gave sight of the stars in numbers so vast they seemed to promise that the journey had meaning beyond survival. Each barrier tested, but each also taught. The people learned patience from rivers, endurance from mountains, humility from deserts. The endless migration was not only pursuit of herds, it was a dialogue with the earth itself, a conversation written in crossings, in struggles, in survival. Each obstacle asked, "Will you endure?" And with every step forward, with every child carried across water, with every elder lifted up a slope, with every mile of sand endured, humanity answered, yes. The migration was not only a path of hunger and pursuit, it was the stage of life itself. Every birth, every laughter, every grief unfolded upon the moving trail. The band did not pause for long seasons in one place. Their road stretched across valleys and deserts, forests and mountains, and upon that road all of human existence was carried. Birth came in the shadow of movement. A mother walked until her body would not walk further, until the child within demanded the world. Then the band gathered, forming a wall of bodies, a living shelter against predators and storm. Hides were laid, fire stoked, water fetched, herbs crushed, voices whispered encouragement, hands pressed her shoulders, and in the cold air or burning sun, a new cry rose, the cry of life joining the endless journey. The infant's first breath mingled with dust and smoke, with the wind that never ceased. The child was lifted, shown to the band, touched by many hands. It was not one mother's alone, not one father's, it was the band's. The newborn's life meant hope, meant the circle would not close, meant memory would walk further still. Wrapped in furs or hides, pressed against a chest, the infant became part of the march before its eyes had yet learned the shapes of trees or mountains. It was carried across rivers, rocked by the rhythm of footsteps, lulled to sleep by the endless sound of wind. Its lullabies were not songs alone, but the voices of many, the chorus of survival. Life grew upon the trail. Children learned to walk not on soft earth near hearths, but upon the path itself, stumbling, rising, mimicking the movements of elders. They played with sticks turned into spears, stones chipped into pretend blades. They laughed in the dust, chased each other between steps of the band, found joy even in hunger. Elders smiled at them, their laughter proof that humanity could carry more than struggle, it could carry joy. Around fires at night, songs rose, and children clapped sticks together, adding rhythm, shaping the first echoes of music. Adolescence came too soon. Young ones took up spears before their shoulders had broadened, joined hunts before their voices had deepened. They ran beside the adults, hearts pounding with pride and fear, learning courage by imitation. Mistakes were costly, sometimes fatal, but they were part of the path. To be young was to step quickly into responsibility, because the band could not afford delay. Life was harsh, but it was full, carried forward with each step, each lesson, each shared victory. Death, too, was never far. The migration left graves behind it, scattered across the world like seeds of memory. A body too weak to rise, a wound that festered, a bite of serpent, a fever that burned until breath failed. All these claimed lives upon the trail. When death came, the band did not stop for long. They gathered, they wept, they laid the body in earth or covered it with stones. Sometimes they smeared red ochre on skin, sometimes placed tools or food beside the dead, offerings for journeys beyond the one they walked. Children watched with solemn eyes, learning that grief was as much a companion as hunger. The band moved on. Behind them lay cairns of stone, shallow mounds of earth, places where ancestors rested. The land was marked not by walls or monuments, but by graves, by the quiet presence of memory. Those who remained carried the dead in story, speaking their names around fire, recalling their courage, warning of their mistakes. The journey was endless, not only for the living but for the dead, whose memory walked beside the band, invisible but present. Thus the migration was not only pursuit of herds, not only endurance of obstacles, it was life itself, stretched across the earth, like a thread of fire carried in ember. Birth, laughter, love, grief, death, all of it walked upon the same road. Humanity was not rooted in place, it was rooted in motion. Its true home was not the cave or the shelter, but the journey itself. And in this endless walking, in this carrying of every cycle upon the back of the earth, humanity discovered its resilience. For to live while moving, to laugh while hungry, to love while grieving, this was survival made greater than endurance. This was the spirit that would carry them not only across plains and mountains, but into the vast future waiting beyond imagine. Every step carried a price. Migration was not only the pursuit of food, not only the echo of herds moving across the horizon, it was sacrifice, hardship, and memory written into the very earth. For each mile gained, something was left behind: strength, blood, companions. The cost of movement was measured in hunger, in exhaustion, in the faces absent. When the band gathered around fire, the people walked until their feet split open, until skin peeled and bled into dust. Blisters burst, soles hardened into leather, muscles trembled with each rise of the leg. The air itself seemed heavier with distance, pressing down, demanding more. Children cried until their voices failed. Elders leaned on sticks until sticks broke, and still they moved, because to stop was to die. The herds did not wait. The seasons did not wait. The earth did not care. Sometimes the cost was sudden. A river too swift pulled a hunter away. A fall from cliff dashed bones against stone. A storm swept across plains and scattered the band like leaves, drowning fires, stealing embers, leaving the people shivering in blackness. Other times the cost was slow, invisible, until one morning a body did not rise, a breath did not return, a pair of eyes stayed closed. The band carried grief in silence, because there was no language strong enough to hold it. But even as movement took, it also gave. The earth kept memory of paths in ways only the people could see. Trails of dust pressed flat by countless feet, valleys where fire had burned, stones stacked to mark where someone had fallen. All were reminders. The people remembered where roots had been plentiful, where water had waited in hidden springs, where caves had sheltered against storm. Elders pointed with hands saying, "Here, here, here," teaching children the invisible map written not on bark or skin but in memory itself. Over generations, these remembered paths became more than routes of survival. They became identity. Each band carried knowledge of its road, its rivers, its mountains, its deserts, its graves. To walk the trail was to walk history. To return to a place where ancestors had died was to feel their presence in the soil, to speak their names into the wind, to remind the children, "We belong here, because they walked here before us." The migration was endless, but it was not aimless. It was a cycle, a weaving across seasons. When rains came, the people turned one way. When rivers shrank, they turned another. When herds stampeded toward new grass, the people followed. The trail was not straight, but circular, spiraling outward, generation after generation, always moving, always enduring, always remembering. And in this movement, something deeper stirred. The people began to see themselves not as wanderers lost, but as part of the great rhythm of the world. The herds moved, the rivers swelled, the storms rolled, the people followed. They were not apart from the earth's cycle, they were within it, a living current of breath and memory carried across the land. The cost of migration was heavy, but its gift was survival, and more than survival, continuity. A thread stretched unbroken through time, fragile yet enduring, binding the living to the dead, the past to the future, the people to the land. When night fell on the road, when fire crackled against the dark, The people rested their tired bodies and lifted their eyes to the stars. They saw not stillness but a map, patterns repeating, lights returning in cycle. And perhaps they understood, dimly but truly, that their own footsteps were like the stars, always moving, always returning, always remembered. The migration never ended. It became humanity itself.
Hunger was the oldest companion of humankind. It followed the people across plains and mountains, into forests and deserts, never far behind, never silent. It was patient, tireless, a shadow that grew longer when rains failed, when herds fled, when roots shriveled in dry soil. Against beasts, the people had spears. Against storms, they had fire. But against hunger, they had nothing but endurance. Seasons of plenty did exist. The rains returned, grass grew tall, fruits swelled on branches, rivers filled with fish. In those months, the people laughed louder, danced longer, ate until bellies pressed full. Children grew strong, their faces round, their laughter constant. Fire crackled, not only with meat, but with abundance. But always, within the circle, there was knowledge. Plenty was brief. The earth always took back what it gave. When the rains delayed, when the plains cracked, when rivers shrank to mud, hunger arrived. At first it was only a murmur in the belly, a faint ache. Then it became sharp, constant, impossible to ignore. The people's eyes hollowed, their steps slowed, their voices grew thin. Children whimpered at night, their ribs sharp beneath their skin. Elders grew silent, saving their strength for breath alone. The band carried on, but each day was a battle not against lions or cold, but against the emptiness inside. Hunger changed everything. Hunts became desperate. Spears were thrown at smaller prey, at rabbits, birds, even lizards fleeing across rocks. Fires roasted insects, roasted roots that in other times would have been ignored for their bitterness. Every sound in the night, the scurry of rat, the splash of fish, was a chance for survival. The people searched the land, not with patience but with frantic eyes, seeking any gift it would yield. But famine was not only in the belly, it was in the spirit. Anger grew sharp, voices snapped, quarrels broke out over scraps of food. Bonds stretched thin beneath the weight of need. Sharing, the law of survival, became heavier, harder. To take more than one's share was unthinkable, yet hunger whispered its temptations into every mind. Mothers wept as they divided roots too small to fill even one mouth. Fathers pressed food into children's hands and turned away, chewing nothing. Elders refused their share altogether, their voices low, "Give it to them, I have lived enough." Some did not rise again the next day. The land itself seemed cruel in these seasons. The sun struck too long, too hard. Winds carried dust instead of rain. Animals moved beyond reach, chasing green horizons the people could not yet follow. Even the trees seemed stingy, their fruits shriveled, their branches bare. The people sat beneath them, weary, waiting, hoping, but no gifts fell. Hunger was not only survival's test, it was its sculptor. It carved ribs into bodies, lines into faces, silence into voices, but it also carved memory. Children learned in these seasons what plenty could never teach: to value every seed, every berry, every bite. They learned patience, they learned endurance, they learned that survival was not only in strength, but in the stubborn will to keep walking even when the belly screamed to stop. The people endured hunger, not because they conquered it, but because they carried it. They bore it together, shared it, remembered it, and when at last the rains returned, when the rivers swelled, when the herds thundered back, they ate with gratitude deeper than joy. They remembered the seasons when there was nothing, and they knew the shadow would return again. It always returned. Hunger was the enemy that could never be killed, never be frightened away, never be outwitted. It could only be endured, and in that endurance, humanity found its truest strength. Hunger made the land look different. Plants once ignored now seemed like promises. Berries too bitter to touch, roots too harsh to chew, mushrooms avoided by instinct. Each became a possibility when the belly screamed louder than memory's warnings. In times of famine, the people turned to the earth in desperation, searching for food in places they had never searched before. And the earth, like any great teacher, gave answers cruel as often as kind.
The gatherers led these forays. They moved quietly, scanning the ground for hidden gifts, their baskets empty, but their eyes sharp. Yet hunger clouded judgment. A berry gleamed red in shadow, sweet or deadly. A root broke the soil's crust, sustenance or poison. No story could always answer. No elder could always recall. Some plants carried faces too similar, disguises too clever. Hunger pushed hands forward even when the heart whispered caution. Sometimes the gamble gave life. A bitter bark, boiled long in fire, became edible, filling the belly with rough sustenance. A root that burned the tongue when raw softened. When roasted, its poison tamed by flame. Insects pulled from logs, worms lifted from soil, grubs hidden in bark. All became protein, all became survival. Fire and patience transformed the inedible into the possible, and hunger bent instinct into invention. But sometimes the gamble brought death. A mushroom eaten at dusk brought cramps by midnight, spasms by dawn, silence by noon. A berry chewed by a child brought foam to the mouth, a final cry, a body still before its time. A leaf, green and innocent, blistered tongues, burned throats, stopped hearts. The people learned the cost of mistakes, not in cautionary tales but in graves hastily dug, in tears shed beside embers. Even survivors bore scars. A poison survived once made the body weaker, slower, vulnerable to the next trial. Stomachs twisted, fevers burned, visions blurred. Some poisons did not kill at once but lingered, draining strength for days, weeks, leaving the band burdened with weakness at the very moment strength was most needed. The band did not abandon these memories. They turned them into story, into law. Elders pointed at plants and named them. Never eat this, even in hunger. They told tales of spirits hidden within them, spirits that punished desperation, spirits that lured the greedy. Some plants became feared not only for their poison, but for their myth. Children learned to spit them out before their teeth even closed. In this way, death was not wasted. It became warning carried forward, and yet, desperation always returned. In the worst of times when herds vanished and rivers failed, even forbidden plants were tested again. Fire was used differently, longer, hotter. Leaves were soaked in water, roots left in embers for days. Sometimes this patience worked. Poison leached away, food revealed beneath danger. Other times the plant's spirit proved stronger, and the band paid in blood. Hunger was not only emptiness, it was temptation, risk, gamble. It forced humanity into knowledge but made that knowledge costly. Every plant that could be eaten was discovered because someone once dared, because someone once suffered. The graves of the hungry became the textbooks of survival, each mistake a page turned, each death a lesson written in silence. Thus, famine was not only an enemy but a teacher, the harshest of all. It carved into memory the knowledge that food was not simple, that the earth was both giver and thief, and it reminded the people that survival was never free, it was always earned, often with pain. Hunger tested not only the body, but the bond. It pressed against the invisible threads that tied the band together, threatening to snap them with each empty belly, each restless night. A lone person could not endure famine. Alone they would waste away into silence. But within the band, something greater stirred. Resilience born not from strength of muscle, but from strength of unity. When food was scarce, fire became more than warmth. It became the table, the place of sharing, the heart of endurance. Even when baskets were nearly empty, the band gathered as always, placing roots, insects, scraps of meat into the center. The act of sharing, though painful, was the very law of survival. No one ate hidden, no one hoarded. To do so would be betrayal, and betrayal in famine was death not only for the hoarder but for all. For unity was the only weapon against hunger's patience. Parents gave first to children, a tuber roasted until its skin blackened, a handful of nuts, a single fish pulled from a shrinking pool. These went into small hands before adult ones. Fathers chewed bark and swallowed bitterness, so that their sons might sleep with full bellies. Mothers pressed food into the mouths of their daughters, and turned away to silence their own hunger. Elders refused altogether, their voices quiet. I have eaten enough in my life, let them live. Their sacrifice was not spoken of as tragedy, but as duty, the last gift of memory to the future. But hunger also revealed other strengths. Songs rose in the darkest nights, not of abundance but of defiance, rhythms tapped on stone, voices layered into chants, words reminding the band that hunger had come before, and hunger had been endured. Stories were told not to frighten but to comfort, tales of past famines, of ancestors who had survived worse, of rivers that had dried and flowed again, of herds that had vanished and returned. These stories were fire for the spirit, food for the mind. Children, though weakest in body, were strongest in laughter. Even as their ribs pressed sharp against skin, they played in the dust, mimicking hunts, running with sticks for spears. Their games reminded the adults of life beyond hunger, of joy still possible, even when bellies ached. Elders watched, their eyes softened, their will renewed. The laughter of children was proof that humanity was not broken. The band endured famine together. As it endured predators and storms, they tightened their circle, kept the fire burning high, slept pressed close to conserve warmth. They hunted in pairs, in groups, no one wandering alone, no risk taken without witness. They rationed not only food but hope, speaking carefully, never letting despair infect the young. Every life mattered more when death waited close, and when the famine finally lifted, when rains returned, when roots swelled, when herds thundered again across the plains. The band rejoiced not only in food but in one another. They had endured together. Hunger had tried to break them, but unity had held. Bonds frayed but were never severed, and from those frayed strands the band wove new strength. This was the secret of their resilience. Hunger could hollow the belly, weaken the body, even take the life of some, but it could not take the circle, not if the circle refused to break. In famine, community was not luxury, it was salvation. There were times when hunger grew so vast, so merciless, that it felt as though the earth itself had turned against humanity. The rains failed for seasons, the rivers shrank to mud, the herds wandered beyond reach and did not return. Plants withered in the sun, roots dried to dust beneath the soil. The sky itself seemed barren, its silence heavy with indifference. In such times the people faced not only famine, but the shadow of extinction. The band shrank. Each night, the circle of fire grew smaller. The spaces once filled by voices now filled by silence. Mothers wept over children who no longer woke, their bodies too frail to endure another day. Elders lay down and did not rise, their last strength given in whispers, urging the young to walk on, to endure. The living carried grief like a second hunger, a hollow within the chest even deeper than the one in the belly. Some bands vanished entirely. Their paths ended in deserts where no water returned, in plains where no herds thundered again, in forests where poison outnumbered sustenance. Their bones sank into earth, their fire turned to ash scattered by the wind. They were lost, yet not truly gone, for those who survived carried their memory, their lessons, their warnings. Every extinction was a story for the living, a guide etched in pain, but not all succumbed. Some endured, by will, by unity, by the stubborn refusal to fall. They bent their laws, risked the poisons of plants, scavenged the kills of other predators, dug deeper, waited longer. They walked farther than before, across lands no ancestor had known, into valleys no fire had yet burned. They became wanderers of impossible distances, driven not by choice but by need, and in that relentless movement, in that refusal to yield, they found survival. The shadow of extinction pressed hard, but within it burned something stronger, the ember of endurance. Each child that survived famine became memory's vessel, carrying forward knowledge written in hunger. Each elder that whispered warnings to the young extended the thread of life. One more day, one more season, one more generation, and though many were lost, humanity itself endured, fragile, fractured, reduced to near nothingness, but alive. From hunger came humility, from extinction came resilience. The people learned that survival was not guaranteed, that the earth gave only reluctantly, that every breath was borrowed, but they also learned that even when death pressed closest, when bellies ached and fires dimmed, they could endure together. And so 100,000 years ago, humanity walked the edge of silence and chose to continue. Their world was hunger and storm, predator and shadow. Their tools were stone, their shelters fragile, their bodies weak, but their will was unbroken. They carried fire, they carried memory, they carried one another. Hunger did not destroy them, it shaped them, it carved into their bones the knowledge that survival demands unity, endurance, courage, and from that carving, from that pain, from that endless struggle, humanity emerged, smaller than the earth, weaker than the beasts, but destined to endure. The shadow of extinction passed, the ember of survival remained, and from that ember, everything that would come, the languages, the songs, the cities, the futures, was already waiting, hidden in the firelight of those who endured the hunger of 100,000 years ago.